The sitting is open. I have learned that Monsieur Calvet wants to make a point of order. Monsieur Calvet.
C'est juste pour modifier mon vote de ce matin, puisque je me suis trompé. Au lieu de voter contre, je vote pour le rapport de Petra et je veux qu'elle m'excuse aussi parce que c'est juste une erreur matérielle. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci à vous, Monsieur Calvet. As you know, a vote cannot be changed, but we have now duly taken note of your statement. So I think from now you can live in peace with the rapporteur. And I see Monsieur Calvet is still explaining what went wrong, but it is now taken note in the minutes of the meeting. We now come to a joint debate on the humanitarian consequences and internal and external migration in connection with the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, the protection and alternative care for unaccompanied and separated migrant and refugee children, and justice and security for women in peace, reconciliation. The reports are presented by the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons, and the third one by the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. The first report from the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons is titled Humanitarian Consequences and Internal-External Migration in Connection with the Aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. You find it in document 15547 and addendum, presented by Mr. Pierre-Alain Frides as the rapporteur. The second report from the Committee of Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons is titled Protection and Alternative Care for Unaccompanied and Separated Migrant and Refugee Children, which you find in document 1554A, and it will be presented by Madam Maria Mezentseva as the rapporteur, and that will be followed by the presentation of an opinion of Madam Sibel Arslan, the rapporteur for opinion, of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, and the final report coming from the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination is titled Justice and Security for Women in Peace, Reconciliation. You find this in document 15525, and it will be presented by Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk, rapporteur, and that will be followed by the presentation of an opinion by Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen on behalf of Madam Boriana Aberg, the rapporteur for opinion of the Committee of Political Affairs and Democracy, and that document you find in document 15538. So we have a full first row, I would say. There is a lot of quality over there. I'm most happy that we have two rapporteurs coming from Ukraine, showing that the Ukrainian delegation is functioning here in the hemicycle. In order to finish by 8 o'clock or as early as possible, I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 6:45 to, no, I think this is something wrong. I will interrupt at a certain stage the list of speakers if needed. I hope that we can accommodate everybody. Now, I remind colleagues that each rapporteur will have 7 minutes to present their reports and a further 5 minutes to reply to the debate. Now I call in the debate Mr. Frides, Pierre-Alain Frides, the rapporteur, to present the first report. You have 7 minutes. La parole est à vous, Pierre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues. C'est une mission qui a été organisée en un temps record, vu l'urgence de la situation. Et donc j'ai eu l'occasion de me rendre en Ukraine, mais réellement j'ai visité la Pologne, la Slovaquie, la Roumanie et l'Ukraine. Et je tiens d'abord à remercier sincèrement le bureau du Conseil de l'Europe à Varsovie. Pour la Slovaquie, on a été aidé par l'OIM, l'Organisation internationale des migrations. Pour la Roumanie, surtout par Diana Stoica et les autorités roumaines. Et pour l'Ukraine, la partie la plus importante, par Maria Mezentseva. Et j'ai aussi vu Larisa Bilozir sur place, et également les autorités locales et régionales des oblasts d'Oujhgorod et Chernivtsi. Et un remerciement à la secrétaire Tatiana Termacic, qui a été vraiment très efficace. Nous avons assisté, chers collègues, à la plus importante migration de population depuis la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Des déplacements énormes, 35 à 40% de la population ukrainienne. Et nous devons prendre la mesure du drame terrible qui touche le peuple ukrainien. On peut parler d'un martyr. Pensons aux images de Bouchka ou de Mariupol, et aujourd'hui dans le Donbass. Des destructions massives aveugles, des atteintes aux droits humains, des crimes de guerre, peut-être secondairement requalifiés en crimes contre l'humanité, des déportations massives vers le territoire russe. Et nous devons constater, avec beaucoup d'admiration, la résistance impressionnante et efficace du peuple et de l'armée ukrainienne. C'est l'héroïsme de tout un peuple. Dans ce rapport, mes propos seront limités à l'aspect humanitaire du conflit, donc aux conséquences humanitaires et aux migrations à l'intérieur du pays et à l'extérieur du pays. À l'intérieur du pays, on appelle ça des personnes déplacées, les IDP. Donc les personnes migrantes qui ont dû quitter leur maison se trouvent dans 3 situations différentes. Il y a une partie d'entre elles qui sont restées dans le pays, qui se sont déplacées en gros de l'Est vers l'Ouest de l'Ukraine. Ensuite, il y a les gens qui sont à l'extérieur du pays, soit dans les pays d'arrivée, à la frontière, soit plus loin. Hors d'Ukraine, dans les pays d'arrivée, on peut citer la Pologne, 4 millions d'Ukrainiens, la Hongrie, 780 000, la Slovaquie, 510 000, la Moldova, 500 000, qui est énorme pour ce petit pays, il en reste environ 80 000. Roumanie, 650 000, il en reste environ 100 000. On doit noter les charges importantes qui ont été assumées par les collectivités locales. Au total, il y a 7,7 millions de personnes qui ont quitté l'Ukraine à ce jour. Et donc certaines sont restées dans les pays d'arrivée, les autres sont allées plus loin. Et on doit noter la grande solidarité des peuples européens, avec la mise en place notamment d'un permis spécial de protection temporaire qui donnait une protection sociale, également la possibilité de travailler. Dans mon pays, la Suisse, par exemple, on compte environ 60 000 réfugiés ukrainiens. Les déplacés internes sont de l'ordre de 7 à 9 millions. C'est difficile de vraiment bien les quantifier car tout le monde ne s'est pas identifié à son lieu d'arrivée, mais les besoins sont colossaux à la charge des Ukrainiens pour s'occuper de ces personnes. Pour répondre à ces besoins qui sont multiples, qui touchent l'alimentation, quand nous étions à Oujgorod et à Tchernitsy, nous avons vu ce qu'on peut appeler des soupes populaires, avec des institutions qui délivraient entre 2 et 5 000 repas par jour. Il y a tout le problème du logement. Je vous donne l'exemple d'Oujgorod, normalement 120 000 habitants, et là maintenant 500 000. Des charges importantes pour les hôpitaux dans ces régions, tout le problème de l'éducation. Et là, on doit quand même noter le seul effet bénéfique de la pandémie Covid, c'est que l'Ukraine, comme les autres pays, s'était mis à la page de la visioconférence pour l'éducation des enfants, et en fait, ça a pu perdurer. Donc il faut répondre à ces besoins, et le poids principal de la gestion de la crise humanitaire repose sur les villes et les collectivités régionales. Il y a besoin d'un soutien au long cours, parce que la guerre risque de durer. Le soutien doit être continu, coordonné, avec des mesures pérennes. Et quand nous étions début mai en Ukraine et ensuite en Roumanie, on nous annonçait que, en fait, l'aide qui arrivait sur place baissait. Il y a un hub en Roumanie, près de Iași, un lieu où l'aide internationale arrive. Et au départ, il y avait 2-3 convois par jour. Et là, maintenant, il n'y en avait plus que 2 par semaine. Et secondairement, il y aura la reconstruction. Et c'est un défi absolument énorme. Je vous signale que début juillet, il y aura en Suisse, à Locarno, un grand séminaire, Ukraine Recovery Conference, dont le but sera de fixer les priorités, les méthodes et les principes de la reconstruction. Et l'idée, ce sera de trouver du financement. Lorsque nous étions sur place, une idée a germé. En fait, elle avait déjà germé dans l'esprit de gens avant nous, modestement, Madame Termacic et moi. C'est qu'on a constaté, par exemple, à Tchernitsy, que les autorités locales disaient que c'était les jumelages qu'ils avaient passés avec des Allemands ou des villes allemandes ou polonaises, qui en fait étaient leur source intarissable d'aide, parce qu'il y avait du contact, des connaissances, du vécu, ce qui fait que les gens à l'extérieur se sentaient concernés. Et en fait, ce que, à travers ce rapport, j'aimerais surtout proposer, c'est une bourse au jumelage, une grande campagne de jumelage de communes-villes d'Ukraine avec les villes d'Europe pour véritablement assurer dans la proximité une aide importante. Si on envoie maintenant de l'aide comme ça, de manière générale en Ukraine, il y a une grande chance, parce que la situation est grave, qu'une grande partie de cet argent finira dans l'armement. C'est un élément important. Mais en fait, pensons aux Ukrainiens, aux populations. Il n'y a rien de mieux qu'une aide directe grâce aux liens qui ont pu être tissés. J'ai eu mardi un entretien ici avec M. Andreas Kiefer, qui est secrétaire général du Congrès des pouvoirs locaux et régionaux. Et en fait, eux ont déjà anticipé et ils ont une plateforme Cities for Cities. Et en fait, on s'est assez bien entendu et l'idée, c'est de partir de cette base pour fructifier cette possibilité d'aide. Ça peut être le point de départ à développer et à amplifier. Chers collègues, le but de ce rapport, c'est de vraiment susciter l'aide au peuple ukrainien sur le plan humanitaire. D'autres sujets sont traités dans le rapport, qui sont connus, les problèmes de traite d'êtres humains, les problèmes des Roms, des minorités, des migrants de pays tiers, des personnes LGBTI, des enfants, des personnes malades, handicapées. Toutes ces personnes-là doivent être prises en compte et ce sont des charges énormes. La délégation ukrainienne a déposé toute une série d'amendements que je n'ai absolument pas discutés. Je les ai tous acceptés. Ils ont été acceptés à l'unanimité par la Commission. L'idée, c'est qu'on n'est pas là pour discuter de détails de chipoter et chipoter. Ce sont ces gens d'Ukraine qui connaissent la réalité. Et là, le but, c'est d'être unis derrière ce rapport, mais surtout derrière le peuple ukrainien qui a besoin d'une grande aide. Merci pour votre attention.
Merci à vous, Pierre-Alain, pour la présentation de votre rapport. I now call in debate Madam Maria Mezensova, the rapporteur, to present the second report. Maria, you have 7 minutes as well.
Thank you, dear President. Dank u wel. Dear colleagues, this report has started its long way of the preparation a little bit more than a year ago. But I couldn't have thought that we will have to change the wording, not a little bit, but quite a lot, but even the title. The extension of the alternative care for unaccompanied and separated migrant, and we add refugee children, was the view of the recent developments of war and ongoing crisis in Ukraine, which, as was rightly said by my dear colleague, Mr. Pierre-Alain Frides, has the highest numbers of the displacements. And if we focus here on Ukraine, it's unfortunately every second child internally or externally displaced. These figures our subcontinent hasn't witnessed since the Second World War. So when we are talking here about the unaccompanied and separated migrant and refugee children, our geography obviously goes beyond our continent, and particularly the high level of how vulnerable they are, how many difficulties they have to go through while traveling through the continent. And we had a great side event, which my dear colleague from the Netherlands, Petra, has organized to show on the example of Afghan children how the mechanisms have to be ensured and enhanced. Of course, if you had an opportunity to go through the text of the report, we highly salute and suggest existing mechanisms, but we understand that the foster care and placing such individuals as unaccompanied minor children, for instance, in the families themselves are the best option possible. Of course, proving the age is becoming a huge difficulty when the ID is either present or absent. The process has to go through smoothly. The challenges such as cultural difficulties or language barriers also can be tackled by all of us jointly. That's why the amendments which were presented also by and highly saluted by the social committees were accepted, and to make it very sure for you that here the diasporas and cultural organizations and many NGOs are playing a decisive role, not only the governmental level, of course. Childhood does not last long, and this is our duty as adults to make it happy, to make it peaceful, and to make it prosperous. That's why education as a paramount right of every child, every human being, promoted by every constitution of our member state, and the, of course, European Convention on Human Rights are in the heart of this report. Of course, we can't forget the involvement of the Secretariat of the Migration Committee, which I highly salute, with our mutual work, but also the UNHCR organization, which took part in the recommendations of this report. Dear colleagues, as a small conclusion, I think this brings an extensive overview of the suggestions how the care should be granted to the unaccompanied migrant children, and also separated migrant children, but also the refugees children. And of course, the challenge that we are facing, we can assess only in the future. Were we right or wrong in our instruments? But we do believe as a group, or let's say working group of the Migration Committee, that this brings us to a great result already. I would also like to stress that the report provides a brief overview of the relevant international and European standards and policies, notably Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which requires positive actions by member states for the protection of the family life of these children. And that's why we again talk about the best practices of the family care. It also maps out some practices in provisions of alternative care arrangements for these children and adolescents, and it also looks at the necessary safeguards of protection and prevention. Dear colleagues, I would like to stress that this let's say, triple debate which is occurring right now is overlapping between these resolutions to be voted, and brings a very clear understanding which guiding principles we're setting right now. This is at the same time sad and a happy moment, because Ukraine takes an active part in this process, because of the recent developments which happened in our country. I would like to thank again the Committee on Social Affairs, Health, Sustainable Development, to the rapporteur, namely Madam Arslan, for the valuable opinion which she produced, and again to the Secretariat of the Committee on Migration. The long-lasting cooperation, I think, will be further strengthened in the resolutions to come. Thank you, dear President.
Thank you, Maria. Now I call Madam Sibel Arslan, the Rapporteur for Opinion of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Developments, and you have 3 minutes, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Colleagues. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mrs. Mezentseva for this important and timely report. According to the UNHCR, 100 million people have now been forced to fly their homes globally. Most of them arrived from countries such as Afghanistan, Syria and Bangladesh, which are facing multiple crises with no tangible solutions in sight. Almost half of the refugees are children. Our governments have all ratified the UN Convention of the Rights of the Children and have a legal and moral obligation to ensure care and protection for every children. Today we also experiencing profound shock and anxiety with respect of the loss of life, destruction and human suffering caused by Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. According to UNICEF, the first month of the war alone led to the displacement of over 4 million children, which is more than half of the country's estimated children population. This is a tragedy for us all. The best way to protect migrants and refugee children, regardless of where they come from, is to invest massively in prevention of armed conflicts, poverty, and look to find solutions and tackling climate change. No parent should have to make the impossible choice between risking their lives by sending their children on dangerous trips or keeping them at home. That said, we must be realistic. With powerful interests at stake, migrants and refugees will continue to arrive in Europe in the years to come. Admittedly, our countries do not have unlimited capacity for welcoming the growing numbers of migrants and refugee children. However, we can and we must do better. If we look at numbers, Turkey alone currently hosts a population of over 3.5 million refugees. In comparison, the total of 74,000 children asylum claim in Europe seems relatively modest. This is certainly a considerable margin for a more generous approach to asylum for children and our continent. So we support this report. To conclude, I would like to support the key messages of the report prepared by Mrs. Mezentseva. Migrant and refugee children are children. They must be treated as such. I strongly support the draft resolution. Thank you very much, and I hope that it will be also supported of us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sibyl. Now I call in the debate. Now I call Madam Evgenia Kravchuk, rapporteur, to present the final report. And you have 7 minutes, Evgenia.
Yes, thank you so much, dear colleagues. It's my first report, and it became very personal. I never knew that I would be finishing it during the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation to Ukraine. And actually, when I was returning from the fact-finding mission on this report from Netherlands, I was traveling from Amsterdam and before that from Hague, I landed in Borispil in Kiev with the last flight on 23rd of February. It was the last flight that landed in the capital of Ukraine, and I really hope there will be a lot more flights after we win this war. So it is my honor to be taking part in this joint debate on 3 important reports, and even each of one of them deserve a whole debate on their own, as their focus and subject matter are quite different. But one thing that they have in common is that all take a starting point Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine as the most real and immediate example of what can happen to people during conflict. All of them show that the examples from Ukraine not only concerned of us as all, but could actually happen to us all, and are indeed happening to many other people in different parts of the world. They show how bad it can get for migrant, refugees and displaced persons, how bad can be the situation of accompanied and separated migrant and refugee children my colleague was writing about. Just remember a story of 11-year-old boy from Zaporizhia crossing by himself a border near Ukraine and Slovakia. And how badly they need protection, assistance, care, and accompanied as casualties of war they never dreamed of, and of which they should never have to dream. And how bad the situation of women can be during conflict, made worse by systems which do not provide sufficient protection, recognition, or proper justice. A difference I see with my own report is that although much of it does look at the negative sides, the failings, injustice and inequality for women during and after conflicts, and at the last the negative consequences of war, in particular for women in the countries former Yugoslavia, it also records successes and shows that women are gaining in importance in political, legal and social mechanisms for justice, peace and reconciliation, including in international criminal courts. Yes, my report looks at women as among the first victims of war and refers to the horrific way that rape and other forms of sexual violence, most often against women and girls, are used as a weapon of war. But it also shows that women are soldiers. 17% of women are in armed forces right now. It shows that they are active citizen defenders, doctors, mothers, activists, leaders, and politicians. And I can assure you they are very good ones. There are many examples of the power of women, from the way women have led countries through the COVID pandemic to the way in which women leaders in my country are contributing to the war efforts, and not only, such as our Vice Prime Minister who had negotiated prisoner exchange and safe quarters, or another Vice Prime Minister who is responsible for European integration of Ukraine. In all our countries, women must be empowered to play a greater role within the highest decision-making bodies and in peace talks. Discrimination against women and girls in post-conflict societies must end. Good practices in the field must be shared and implemented. Women and men must work together to end discrimination as means of avoiding and averting conflict. Education for girls and boys needs to be gender mainstreamed to put an end to trajectories that favor men and relegate women to lower levels of expertise and responsibility. I would like to thank Ms. Arbour, she's not here, but we had a great meeting on Monday, for her opinion from the Political Affairs Committee. The amendment she suggests is to reinforce the recommendations it contains. The report illustrates that there is a very long way to go before women's potential is taken properly into account. Gender-specific protection is needed in all times during conflict, and special psychological and medical support are vital after conflict has ended. Capacity building and empowerment are two essential elements for assisting women in assuming their rightful roles in decision-making. Listening to women from the Balkans and during my visit to The Hague, including to the International Criminal Court and the residual mechanism of former Yugoslavia, I was able to develop a series of recommendations for the draft resolution I have before you now. Among them are the need for member states to ratify and implement the international legal norms which provide for the protection of women and their empowerment, in particular those which are part of the United Nations Women, Peace and Security Agenda. States must also work towards feminist foreign policies, taking those countries which have adopted this approach as models. I'm extremely proud that my parliament had voted to ratify the Council of Europe Istanbul's Convention, and the President signed it yesterday. The Convention recognizes, and I quote, that the realization of the UN de facto equality between women and men is a key element in the prevention of violence against women, and that violence against women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between women and men, which have led to domination over and discrimination against women by men, and to the prevention of the full advancement by women. This is the key to achieving justice and security for women in peace reconciliation, and for achieving the equality for women in general. We must therefore all continue to advocate for universal ratification of the Istanbul Convention. Women must participate at all levels of decision-making. Women's civil society organizations must be able to function without obstacle and with state support. Training must be provided for military forces in gender awareness and the need for differentiated treatment. And very important thing, there can't be a lasting peace without justice, without the prosecution of perpetrators of human rights violations. And justice cannot be done if we do not work on building up evidence, on recording the events as they happened, as the war crimes happening committed by Russians in Ukraine, and bearing witnesses and hearing testimonies. It is difficult for me, as a woman from a country under attack, to speak about future peace and about reconciliation, but as I just said, there can be no peace without justice. And the foundations of that justice need to be laid right now. Ukrainians are sure that they will win this war because we are defending the democracy against autocracy, dictatorship, and our independence. We feel the support from all of you, and we will one day achieve a peaceful future and peaceful life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yevgenia. And once again, congratulations for your parliament, your government and your president for ratifying our most important Istanbul Convention. If you can do that under these circumstances, you deserve our extra appreciation. Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen to present. Yes, there's nothing wrong with applauding for that. Now I call for Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen to present the opinion on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. Kimmo, you have 3 minutes.
Mr. President, this is a bit extraordinary situation because I am making a speech in this hemicycle. First time the speech is not mine. I'm an alter ego for Mrs. Boriana Åberg in Sweden. It's an honor, it's a delight that I can make her speech. It's her speech. But there's one paragraph I disagree, and I will make a due note about when we are in that paragraph. Otherwise, her speech comes. Dear colleagues, I would like to start by paying tribute to the work of the rapporteur of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, Mrs. Yevgenia Kravchuk. Congratulations. Completing her report while the Russian Federation continues to wage war on Ukraine must have not been easy. Russian Federation aggression caused and continue to cause enormous destruction and human suffering, especially to children and women. Indeed, as history has repeatedly shown us, women and girls are among the first casualties of war. Notably, as victims of conflict-related sexual violence, the ongoing war is unfortunately no exception. That being said, during war, women are not only victims, but also key actors at the political, military, and humanitarian forefront. The Ukrainian women parliamentarians of this assembly have demonstrated this by amply, and that's true. That's my addition. Similarly, research and previous experience from different parts of the world, from Northern Ireland to Middle East and Africa, show that women's participation in peace and reconciliation processes are fundamental in moving those processes forward. Fully agree also, that's my note. A recent study found that women's participation increases by 35% the probability of a peace agreement lasting 15 years. According to the same study, in cases where women were able to exercise a strong influence on the negotiations process, there was a much higher chance that an agreement would be reached than when women's groups exercised weak or no influence. In cases of strong influence of women, an agreement was almost always reached. And that's absolutely true. I have also personal experience on that one. And that's also my note. Not only for the sake of equality, but also for the sake of efficiency, we can no longer continue to exclude women from the negotiation table. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy welcomes this timely report. It proposes 5 amendments to the draft resolution with a view to strengthening its message. 2 of them relate to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and the other United Nations Women and Peace and Security resolutions, and recall that the implementation of these resolutions falls in the first places of member states. And Mr. President, now comes the paragraph which is not mine. I don't agree. 2 other amendments concern the recruitment of women in armed forces and the gender dimension. In this context, she would like to stress that women's participation in armed forces is not only a matter of equal rights, but also promotes increased competence of talents. Mr. President, I personally disagree the amendment number 3 to promote the recruitment of women to armed forces. I principally don't support further militarization of our societies in general. Ukraine is a specific case, but in general I don't support. That's why I'm disagreeing that amendment number 3 personally. Committee agrees. Finally, and that I agree also, an amendment is proposed to stress the importance of quality of education and capacity building for developing peaceful societies. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Arberg and Mr. Kiljunen, because there were 2 people speaking here in one person. Before I'm now opening the debate, I would welcome in our hemicycle the President of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, Mr. Leen van Beek, who is sitting in front of me, and the Secretary General of the Congress. They just returned from a very important and informative fact-finding mission to Ukraine, where they especially met with many representatives of the local and the regional authorities and many of the mayors, and where they presented their Cities for Cities initiative. So I'm happy that both the President and the Secretary General are here with us to listen to our debate, because they soon will have their debate in their Congress. Thank you very much for being here, Leen. Now I call in the debate as the first speaker Mr. Fouad Benchika from Belgium. He represents the groups of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Fouad, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, first I want to thank the rapporteurs for their excellent work and their complementary work. I think it's really important that we're having this joint debate today. Every child should easily be left in care of their parents, regardless of their legal documents or their reason of fleeing. Family reunification should always be the priority, but unfortunately, in reality, it's too often the last solution that is sought after. This causes a massive impact on the well-being of a child and their opportunities to rebuild their lives. At every procedural step, guidance should be provided to separate migrants and refugee children. Therefore, trained guardians must be assigned within 24 hours for the protection and safety of these minors. I should not have to remind you about the worrying fact that over the course of 3 years, at least 18,000 minors disappeared. Another huge issue that is still often overlooked is that when migrants and refugee children turn 18, they are still too often sent back to unsafe countries. Afghanistan is a prime example. Claiming that Afghanistan is a safe country is being blind to the horror and atrocity happening there. Turning 18 means that you can no longer have access to the right to a dignified life. Particularly, attention should also be paid to children with special needs, traumatized children, LGBT children, victims of violence, abuse, and human trafficking. Each case should be looked at the individual, provided to the best care and protection necessary. And as soon as a child arrives in a country of asylum, a best interest assessment should be in place. Child protection officers at the borders could quickly and accurately identify vulnerable children and address the immediate protection and care. But our main goal should always be to save future generations from having to flee. We have to keep tackling the root causes of why people have to flee their countries in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fouad. The next speaker, le prochain orateur dans notre débat est M. Bernard Fournier de la France. Il parle au nom du groupe PPE. Bernard.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Je veux tout d'abord remercier nos 5 collègues rapporteurs pour leur excellent rapport et avis. Le débat conjoint que nous tenons cet après-midi illustre les conséquences dramatiques de l'agression de la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine, à l'origine du plus important mouvement de population en Europe depuis la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Plus de 6 millions de personnes ont ainsi quitté l'Ukraine pour se réfugier dans d'autres pays européens, tandis que 7 à 9 millions de personnes ont été déplacées sur le territoire ukrainien. Les États européens, et en particulier les pays voisins, se sont mobilisés pour soutenir et accueillir les réfugiés ukrainiens, tant au niveau national que local. Je voudrais maintenant souligner l'engagement des collectivités territoriales françaises qui ont très vite mis à disposition des hébergements et des moyens pour leur venir en aide. Nous devons malheureusement constater que les besoins restent immenses. Le Conseil de l'Europe, qui a rapidement pris la mesure de la situation, s'est engagé pour garantir les droits des réfugiés, parfois mis à mal dans cette période. De plus, la lutte contre les discriminations ne doit pas être mise en sommeil. Les migrants qui fuient la guerre ne doivent pas être discriminés en fonction de leur orientation sexuelle ou de leur appartenance éthique. Notre Assemblée doit ainsi rappeler la nécessité de garantir les droits de tous sans discrimination. La protection des enfants migrants ou réfugiés non accompagnés ou séparés est également un sujet de préoccupation important, leur nombre augmentant au fur et à mesure que la guerre se prolonge. Des mesures doivent être prises dans chacun de nos États membres pour assurer la protection de ces enfants particulièrement vulnérables, conformément aux obligations découlant de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Alors que le conflit semble s'installer dans la durée, il apparaît également nécessaire de travailler à l'intégration des réfugiés au sein des pays d'accueil. Si le droit de l'Union européenne permet aux personnes bénéficiant de la protection temporaire d'accéder au marché du travail, de nombreux obstacles demeurent néanmoins pour les postulants, en commençant par la barrière linguistique ou la reconnaissance des diplômes. Se pose également pour les parents réfugiés la question de la garde des enfants qui ne seraient pas scolarisés ou pour leurs enfants en âge d'aller à l'école, celle du choix de suivre ou non les cours en ligne proposés par le gouvernement ukrainien. Le travail à faire reste donc immense et notre soutien à l'Ukraine devra être renforcé dans la durée. Je veux enfin saluer l'engagement des femmes de la délégation ukrainienne au sein de notre Assemblée, mais aussi dans tous les pays européens qu'elles visitent. À cette aune, je suis certain qu'elles joueront un rôle majeur, le moment venu, dans le processus de paix et de réconciliation. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, cher Bernard. Now in the debate I call Mr. Dmitry Nataluka from Ukraine, and he speaks on behalf of the European Conservative Group. Dmitry, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of this Assembly, esteemed rapporteurs. Thank you very much for this report, for your time and personal efforts in preparing this document that we consider timely and adequate. I'd like to start with a quote from the report. With the fall of Mariupol, it is clear that the Russian army has no other objective than the total annihilation of Ukraine. Now, as a Ukrainian, I strongly support and agree with this opinion, but as to a member of this distinguished assembly, what does this quote suggest to me? That the staggering and horrific humanitarian consequences and internal and external migration in connection with the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine mentioned in this report are unfortunately only starting to unveil. That 14 million people who are put on the roads to flee the Russian-led hostilities in a number that will be only growing. 1/3 of Ukrainians forced from their homes is not the limit. That this is indeed the largest human displacement crisis in modern history and one of the biggest issues Europe has ever faced. A human displacement that is unfortunately far from over. Therefore, I wholeheartedly welcome and endorse specific propositions made in this report, both to elevate the fate of the 7 million of internally displaced persons and more than 6 million of Ukrainians who fled the country, as well as to introduce a series of sustainable measures to support Ukraine and the host countries. For instance, the suggestion to start thinking now about the reconstruction of Ukraine is fundamentally important, as much as is the necessity to carefully target and coordinate the international assistance to rebuild the country. The report also justly indicates a regrettable gradual decrease of substantial humanitarian donations and stresses that this humanitarian aid must be subject to monitoring and quality control within a mechanism we have to collectively develop. The call to strengthen the CEB's resources with a view to improving its ability to address urgent needs through targeted grants and increasing its capacity to finance long-term investments in social infrastructure is also critical given the circumstances. This and other proposals do indeed make this report timely. What would make it truly urgent and pressing, however, is more focus on one particularly staggering issue. According to Russia's officials, since the beginning of war, 1,936,911 Ukrainians have been deported to Russia, of which 307,000 people are children. Again, 307,000 Ukrainian children have been forcibly moved to Russia. Russia is literally stealing Ukraine's future. As Europe and Central Asia's director for UNICEF, Afshan Han, fairly mentioned, the war in Ukraine is a child rights crisis, because nearly 2/3 of children in Ukraine have been uprooted during the war. The forcibly moved children and adults are deprived of any sort of social protection, are going through the process of so-called filtration, and they are often treated as prisoners of war despite being civilians. It is therefore critical to introduce a special monitoring mechanism so that we don't lose trace of these people who are being forcibly deported as far as Siberia. We often say never again, but here it is again, the incarnation of the Gulag archipelago in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitro. Next in the debate, I call now Madam Petra Stiener from the Netherlands, and she speaks on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe. Het woord is aan jou, Petra.
Dank u wel, meneer de president. Thank you, Mr. President. All three rapporteurs are asking very urgent questions. How do we deal with the present war situation on our continent? What is needed to deal with the short and long-term humanitarian consequences of internal and external migration in connection with the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine? And how can we protect separate migrant and refugee children as well in the short and long term? And how can we obtain justice and security for women in peace reconciliation? On behalf of the ALDE Group, I want to compliment all three rapporteurs and the rapporteurs for opinion for their important work. Well, Mr. President, actually all these reports deserve a whole afternoon for discussion. But what strikes us as the ALDE group is that every report has clear conclusions on what needs to be done. And they entail important insights for us to take into account in dealing with the crisis we're in. Firstly, the ALDE group appreciates the recognition in the report of Mr. Fridas on the key role played by many international organizations, but also local, regional authorities, civil society in providing dignified humanitarian response to the plight of the Ukrainian people, and realizes that this support is essential for addressing the many challenges faced by host states. Secondly, the ALDE group agrees with Mrs. Vicenteva's observations that children should be allowed to be children and receive child-friendly treatment by migration authorities, even when they're fleeing war and crisis and are no longer accompanied by their parents or other adults or caretakers. This should be true for children from the Ukraine, as we have seen in many instances lately, but also for children from other countries facing war and crisis. This afternoon, I co-sponsored a side event on a documentary called Shadow Game on 4 of these children, young teenage boys from, among others, Afghanistan and Syria. And the question was, why did they have to go through such an ordeal to find safety? Mrs. Vicenteva's report gives good answers on how to protect children on the move. And then thirdly, the ALDE group completely agrees with the conclusion of Ms. Kravchuk's report. Women must be present and active at all stages of peace building, recognized not only as victims of war, but as actors at the forefront of peacekeeping, defense and humanitarian actions, among others. And Ms. Kravchuk and Ms. Vicentseva and all her other colleagues, they show in the shape of the Women's Diplomatic Battalion what that means for this present and what it means for the future. Indeed, the future is female. Thank you.
Dank u wel, Petra. Now, the fifth and last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Mr. Paul Gavin from Ireland, and he speaks on behalf of the United European Left. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the United European Left, I want to give a welcome to each of these reports. The call for unaccompanied and separated migrant and refugee children to be considered as children and their best interest ensured irrespective of their migrant status should be adopted and supported by everyone in this chamber. Equally, the call for women to be empowered to play a greater role within the highest decision-making bodies and in peace talks must be heeded. It's very difficult to do justice, by the way, to these 3 reports in such a short space of time, but I do want to move on to Mr. Frida's report on Ukraine, which paints a very stark picture of the extent of the humanitarian crisis that has resulted from this war. As the rapporteur points out, we are looking at the largest movement of people since World War II. As of June 9th, there have been over 7 million refugee movements from Ukraine, and over 8 million people have been displaced internally. Ukrainian authorities have reported more than 2 million movements back into the country. UNHCR project there could be as many as 8.3 million refugees by the end of this year. A key message from this report in paragraph 5 is that it is essential to ensure continued long-term and coordinated support from the Council of Europe member states, especially in the regrettable absence of any new peace initiative. This war looks set to continue for some considerable time to come. And it's concerning to note that after an incredibly generous response from member states in the early weeks of this war, there has been a gradual decrease in humanitarian donations. Now, in the short time left, I want to make a few key points in relation to the report. Firstly, the sheer scale of the crisis and its burden on neighbouring states means that notwithstanding the welcome decision of EU member states to implement the Temporary Protection Directive, there needs to be a solidarity mechanism put in place to prevent a humanitarian disaster unfolding in many of these border states. Secondly, the dangers of trafficking, exploitation and abuse cannot be underestimated, and the call to establish a transnational tracking system that would help border police to identify potential victims must be put into action. Third, the vulnerability of certain groups of people fleeing from war, most notably Roma, third country nationals and members of the LGBTI groups, must be a cause of real concern to us all. It should be a matter of not just regret, but shame that these people have not been given the same welcome as Ukrainian nationals. Fourth, the focus on how to support the reconstruction of Ukraine is very important. Here, quite apart from donors' conferences and an enhanced role for the Council of Europe Development Bank, I do wonder whether this Assembly should not be calling for a complete cancellation of Ukraine's national debt. Otherwise, it could take decades for this country to recover from this terrible war. Finally, I would ask us all to reflect on how the very positive and generous response to the Ukrainian refugee crisis has shown us what is possible when member states act in unison and solidarity. Unfortunately, it's in stark contrast to the way refugees from other countries like Afghanistan and Syria have been treated, facing a fortress Europe. I support the call from the rapporteur for a new approach to be taken to other refugees in Europe who continue to have a very different and negative experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Prochaine oratrice est Madame Marietta Caramanli de la France, mais elle n'est pas là. So we continue with Madame Katia Polidori from Italy. Katia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our colleague Kravchuk for the complete and timely work that she did. I will continue in Italian. Io sono certa di poter parlare a nome degli italiani tutti che sin dal primo momento hanno condannato con grande fermezza l'aggressione da parte della Federazione Russa nei confronti dell'Ucraina e si sono subito messi a disposizione per accogliere i bambini e le donne. Proprio ieri lo stesso nostro Presidente Mattarella, che abbiamo anche ospitato in quest'Aula, ha avuto parole di riconoscenza e, per citarlo letteralmente, ha sottolineato come nel loro operato queste persone si rispecchiano i valori della nostra Costituzione. La risoluzione in esame esorta tutti gli attori coinvolti nei processi di pace ad aumentare la partecipazione delle donne, ad utilizzare una prospettiva di genere in tutti i negoziati e trattative per la pace e la sicurezza. In questi 119 giorni di durissimi combattimenti, intervenendo nel Parlamento italiano, ho più volte espresso forte preoccupazione per l'aggressione in atto, per l'escalation di violenza che si sta perpetrando ai danni dei civili, principalmente bambini e donne, sia che essi fuggano per portare in salvo i minori, sia che eroicamente restino per partecipare alla resistenza. Vedere le lacrime delle donne ucraine mentre tenacemente offrono aiuto alle loro connazionali esorta tutti noi a non voltarci dall'altra parte, ma ad intervenire presso ciascun governo perché faccia il possibile a livello diplomatico e politico per siglare prima possibile il cessate il fuoco. Ho fatto appello alla comunità internazionale affinché fossero adottate misure speciali per proteggere le donne, le giovani e le bambine dalla violenza, in particolare dallo stupro e da altre forme di orribili crimini sessuali. Il mio applauso di prima per la notizia della firma, appunto notizia di ieri, della Convenzione di Istanbul, era un applauso veramente sentito e non di certo formale. Inoltre ho esortato la comunità internazionale affinché dia piena attuazione alla risoluzione 1325 delle Nazioni Unite su donne, pace e sicurezza, rendendo le donne protagoniste delle trattative di pace e del conseguente processo di ricostruzione materiale e valoriale delle nazioni oggi in guerra. Le donne contribuiscono e come alla battaglia per difendere la democrazia e la libertà, ma non sono ammesse a partecipare ai processi decisionali riguardanti pace e sicurezza. Ma è proprio al tavolo della pace che dovrebbero sedere delle donne, perché esse sono mediatrici per votazioni naturali. Come ho sottolineato la nostra relatrice, non è solo irrealistico e surreale la non partecipazione, ma addirittura critica. Sono molte le statistiche che ci ricordano come le donne siano state fondamentali e siano maggiormente risoluti i processi quando le donne sono coinvolte. Io vorrei porgervi una domanda forse un po' provocatoria, ma poi se ci pensiamo bene nemmeno più di tanto. Se i capi di Stato di Russia e di Ucraina fossero state due donne o anche solo uno di essi, saremmo in questo tipo di guerra, una guerra che noi pensavamo relegata ai libri di storia. Le donne danno la vita, non la tolgono. Le donne capiscono appieno la tragedia di vedersi strappare un figlio. Dalle donne nasce la vita e se riuscissimo a farle sedere ai tavoli che contano, i tavoli delle trattative, sarà per le donne che si ristabilirà la pace. Grazie Presidente.
Thank you. Now we move to Mr. Sanchez Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will continue in Spanish. Verdaderamente se observa aquí una confusión asombrosa sobre cuestiones que no deberían ser tan confusas. El derecho de asilo y la protección subsidiaria reconocida por la Unión Europea y además con arreglo a tratados internacionales ajenos a la Unión Europea son suficientes, sin duda, para proteger a los refugiados de la guerra de Ucrania. Sobre eso no hay ninguna duda, incluyendo a los menores no acompañados. son suficientes. Ahora bien, si se quiere extender el derecho de asilo sujeto a la condición de refugiado y la protección subsidiaria a otros motivos, como puedan ser, como se dice en estos textos que se ponen a la consideración de esta Cámara, el cambio climático o la necesidad económica, entonces evidentemente hay un problema. Pero esto no guarda relación con la guerra de Ucrania, porque la guerra de Ucrania por sí es suficiente para asegurar ese estatus de refugiado o de protección subsidiaria eventualmente. Por lo tanto, esto había que aclararlo, porque me parece que es poco riguroso. Y, por consiguiente, lo que podemos decir es que aquí quizá hay un intento de ir más allá de lo que la necesidad actual de un conflicto como el de Ucrania requiere, por razones que, desde luego, no guardan relación directa con esa guerra. Y, además, debo decir que la experiencia española en cuanto a menores acompañados es terrible, porque ha habido menores no acompañados que han sido lanzados a violar la frontera española en el sur de España, en las ciudades autónomas de Ceuta y Melilla, por las autoridades de Marruecos, violando claramente los derechos de esos menores y de sus padres a su guardia y custodia, por engaño. Y algo parecido ha tenido que sufrir Polonia con la llegada masiva de personas procedentes de Medio Oriente y de más allá, en el Oriente, a través de Bielorrusia. De modo que, claro, aquí no se puede hablar de todo de una forma confusa, sin orden ni concierto, mezclándolo todo con motivos claramente fundados en la guerra, que todos compartimos, y con motivos que son ajenos a este conflicto. Nada más.
Thank you. Maintenant, Monsieur Le Nez, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. La guerre en Ukraine a précipité de nombreuses personnes sur les routes, dont des personnes vulnérables, et en particulier des enfants. Face à ce drame, le Conseil de l'Europe ne peut rester indifférent. L'adoption des résolutions qui nous sont présentées aujourd'hui permettra à notre Assemblée de manifester son soutien envers les populations ukrainiennes déplacées ou réfugiées. En parallèle, ce soutien doit se manifester par un renforcement des moyens destinés à soutenir les Ukrainiens dans le besoin. Les États membres de notre organisation doivent renforcer les ressources allouées à la Banque de développement du Conseil de l'Europe pour permettre à celle-ci d'accroître sa capacité d'intervention par des subventions ciblées. De même, l'Union européenne doit poursuivre ses efforts en faveur de l'Ukraine, qui a depuis manifesté son souhait de rejoindre l'Union. L'activation de la directive européenne sur la protection temporaire a permis de fournir un cadre juridique clair pour l'accueil des Ukrainiens dans les pays de l'Union européenne. Une aide de plus de 4 milliards d'euros a également été débloquée pour soutenir l'État ukrainien et son peuple. Ces efforts sont conséquents, mais ils doivent être maintenus dans la mesure où la guerre dure. Comme souvent, lorsque des conflits éclatent, les premières victimes sont les enfants, qui constituent un groupe particulièrement vulnérable. Cela se vérifie aujourd'hui puisque, selon l'UNICEF, plus de 90% des personnes ayant fui l'Ukraine sont des femmes et des enfants. Dans ce contexte, des mesures particulières doivent être prises. Tout d'abord, il m'apparaît nécessaire que les États membres de notre organisation offrent aux enfants des réfugiés ukrainiens qu'ils accueillent la possibilité d'intégrer leur système scolaire. Mais c'est le cas en France. Concernant les mineurs non accompagnés, ils doivent pouvoir être accueillis dans des structures adaptées. En Pologne, un système de tutorat a été instauré pour permettre à un adulte de prendre en charge des mineurs non accompagnés ukrainiens à la suite d'une décision du tribunal aux affaires familiales. Quoi qu'il en soit, un accès à l'éducation doit pouvoir être proposé à ces mineurs non accompagnés. Ensuite, il faut absolument protéger les enfants contre les trafiquants et le travail forcé. Le chaos qui a suivi l'attaque russe est en effet une aubaine pour les criminels qui exploitent la misère humaine. Le groupe d'experts sur la lutte contre la traite des êtres humains au Conseil de l'Europe a rapidement pris la mesure du problème et publié une déclaration dès le 17 mars rappelant les obligations des 48 États partis à la Convention du Conseil de l'Europe sur la lutte contre la traite des êtres humains. Un renforcement des opérations de la police au point d'arrivée des réfugiés et l'enregistrement des personnes qui proposent des services d'hébergement sont nécessaires pour éviter que les enfants ne tombent sous la houlette des trafiquants. Dans ce contexte plus qu'alarmant, je voterai donc sans réserve
l'ensemble des textes qui nous sont proposés aujourd'hui.
Merci, Monsieur. And now we move to Madame Gunay.
Thank you. Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for her valuable effort in preparing this excellent report. Considering the recent challenges that we have now faced, namely the ongoing war in Ukraine, the vital role of women became evident in building and safeguarding peaceful and democratic societies. The war in Ukraine has shown us yet again that women and girls are among the first casualties of war as the victim of conflict-related sexual violence. Hence, as it is stated in the report, it is not acceptable that women are not at the table during peace talks despite their status as victims and stakeholders. However, sadly, according to the United Nations statistics, about 10 out of 10 peace talks did not have women mediators. This situation results in not only a lack of provisions on the priorities of women and girls, but also a lack of reflection regarding women's perspective in peace talks. Dear colleagues, I firmly believe that recommendations that have been made to empower women's participation, not only for peace and reconciliation, but also during the conflict, require the attention of every member state of peace. I think it's time to reconsider traditional foreign policies by opening new pathways for intersectional rethinking from the perspective of women. To that end, women's representation in foreign policy ministries should be increased. For example, the ratio of female employees in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey is around 38%. In terms of ambassadors, female representation is around 25%. It is crucial to ensure that women are protected against violence while providing the same opportunities to women in the armed forces as their male counterparts. Secondly, empowering women to be involved in peace missions and conflict resolution is of utmost importance, considering our ability to change the course of events when given opportunities. So, member states should provide necessary training as mentioned in the report. Before concluding, I would like to invite all member states to contribute to the efforts to involve and guarantee women in peace negotiations and enhance women's representation during transitional justice proceedings. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to Madame Gourmay.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. As the Russian Federation is waging an unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression in our continent, violating the rules of the international order laid down after the Second World War, and in gross violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine, talking about the role of women in war and peace is not a mere theoretical exercise. It is our everyday reality as Europeans. It is our clear obligation to ponder this reality now, here in the Council of Europe, and at home as a member of our respective parliaments. One day, hopefully very soon, this insane war will end, and then we will all have to be ready to lead the way towards a future where women and girls are not only heard, but actually sit at the negotiation table, as already said. Having said that, let me be clear from the beginning. I wholeheartedly support this report without any reservation whatsoever. I warmly congratulate, I'm really concentrating on the report of Evgenina Kravchuk on the work that you have been doing. And I was very happy to have a great discussion at the network meeting. So you please allow me also, not only to you, but to your dear colleague as well, to express my deepest sympathy towards your country. Your heroic people and Ukrainian people elite from the example shown. So, dear colleagues, please allow me to underline only one thing in the report that we as national lawmakers can instantly lobby for in our countries, and if it is not already in place. That is one thing which I call caring for victims in points 10.2 and 10.3 of the report, because I think it's crucial. Do we do everything in order to empower witnesses, survivors, and affected communities to actively contribute to investigations, as 10.2 stipulates, or facilitate gender-specific collections of testimonies from persons being suffered sexual violence during conflict, taking care to avoid re-traumatization by providing expert support and guarantees of confidentiality, as 10.3 says? Indeed, violence and rape are back in our continent as weapons used by an aggressor who wants not only to occupy and defeat, but also to humiliate and annihilate. This attitude is unacceptable in our civilization, and we should act accordingly. We should not let these crimes to go unpunished. I especially urge Member of Parliament for countries that welcome Ukrainian refugees to go after points 10.2 and 3 and work on them relentlessly. Yes, I also urge us to go home and question and lobby our government and verify whether we are all doing what should be done for justice and for the protections of the victims. Have we ratified and adopted all the documents and procedures mentioned? Did we educate our own authorities to carry out the task mentioned in point 10.2 and 3? Please let us all work on this by asking questions, analyzing expertise, and giving advice for improvement. We should all make this important report come alive as soon as possible. Parliamentary procedures and ratifications is one thing. Insisting lobbying is another. We need both. Thank you very much for your attention. And once again, congratulations for this extraordinary work done. Never forget, the aggressor is going after what we know as European civilizations. Ukraine is the one standing in the way now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, is Madame Tabakou here? No? Okay, then we move on to Madame Carobio Guschetti. Microphone, Madam. The grey one.
Ringrazio le relatrici e i relatori per i loro rapporti, rapporti che hanno ben evidenziato la necessità di misure per proteggere chi è in fuga dalla guerra in Ucraina, di proteggere i minori, di proteggere i bambini non accompagnati, di combattere le discriminazioni e garantire i loro diritti. Mi allineo quindi alle richieste contenuti nelle risoluzioni, in particolare nella risoluzione portata avanti dal collega Fride, così anche come quelle proposte concrete per attuare quanto è stato presentato nel suo rapporto, così come quelle sulla protezione dei bambini migranti e non accompagnati. Mi concentrerò quindi brevemente sul ruolo delle donne nel processo di pace, che è centrale, come hanno già detto alcune colleghe che sono intervenute. Solo lavorando assieme, donne e uomini, mettendo fine alle discriminazioni legate al genere, si possono evitare e prevenire i conflitti. Ciò significa includere una prospettiva di genere nella risoluzione dei conflitti e nei processi di pace, che tenga conto dei bisogni particolari delle donne. C'è necessità, ma c'è urgenza per porre la questione della sicurezza e della giustizia delle donne e per le donne in cima all'agenda globale e dare potere alle donne in tutte le fasi della risoluzione dei conflitti e dei processi di pace. Quando parlo di potere parlo di partecipazione, di ruolo centrale, così come ce l'hanno finora gli uomini. È sottolineato molto bene anche nel rapporto della relatrice, quando dice che le donne sono le principali vittime civili nei conflitti, spesso non hanno i mezzi per prevenirli e ciò nonostante sono escluse dai negoziati per la risoluzione dei conflitti e sono relegate a un ruolo marginale nel processo di ricostruzione o di riconciliazione. E lo confermano i dati che sono citati nel rapporto, dati delle Nazioni Unite, che dimostrano che tra il 1992 e il 2019 le donne hanno rappresentato in media solo il 13% dei negoziatori, il 6% dei mediatori e il 6% dei firmatari nei principali processi di pace in tutto il mondo. Circa 7 processi di pace su 10 non hanno incluso donne mediatrici o firmatarie. Spero adesso che di fronte a questa gravissima situazione, a questo conflitto, a questa grave guerra in Ucraina di aggressione, ci sia un maggiore coinvolgimento delle donne. Quindi è importante questa risoluzione, questo rapporto, così come sono stati importanti e sono importanti gli interventi che più volte abbiamo sentito in quest'Aula dalle donne. E evidentemente ciò va accompagnato da misure contro le discriminazioni e le violenze che donne e ragazze subiscono a causa del loro genere, in fuga dalla guerra con i loro figli e con le persone anziane, sono spesso minacciate da violenza, aggressioni sessuali e stupro che vengono usate come arma di guerra. Riconoscendo quindi le peculiarità legate al genere e alle conseguenze dei conflitti, certamente possiamo fare un passo importante per la pace. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Now we go online to Madam Komienko. Is she with us? She's not with us. No, then we will come back to her. No, she's here.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank our rapporteurs for delivering these reports. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, its citizens on the ground continue to suffer from its impact, and the number of casualties and forced displacements has continued to rise. It can already be stated that the Russian invasion into Ukraine will have far-reaching consequences. The United Nations National General Assembly at an emergency special session in March adopted a resolution on humanitarian consequences of the aggression against Ukraine. The document notes the serious humanitarian consequences of Russia's military action against Ukraine, including siege, shelling, and airstrikes on populated cities of Ukraine, as well as attacks on civilians, civilian objects, schools, kindergartens, water supply systems, medical facilities, abductions of officials, and attacks on evacuation columns, and others. Illegal actions of the aggressor country during the war violate human rights, among which the fundamental right is the right to life, which is guaranteed in a democratic society. States have an obligation not to violate human rights during war and armed conflict. Everyone has the right to insist that his or her rights be respected. It must be recognized that in the face of war and mass violence, the level of human rights violations is so high, and it is therefore important for states to comply with the obligation not to engage in such conduct. Progressive states are actively advocating the adoption and development of international law that limits the arbitrariness of those who are at war and aimed at banning the brutal means and methods of hostilities. During the armed conflict, many people lose not only their lives, but also their health, property, and cruel treatment of themselves and their loved ones. In particular, many people are forced to leave their place of residence during hostilities, acquiring the status of internally displaced persons or displaced persons outside the country. During a military conflict, when international and external migration takes place, there is a need to protect the rights and interests of children as part of the civilian population. However, given the vulnerabilities and needs of child development, children have special protections. I would like to draw attention to some of the report provisions to be taken into considerations. The report on humanitarian consequences of the Russian Federation waged war against Ukraine. It's all about semantics. So the term Russian Federation attack on Ukraine cannot correspond to legally binding and internationally recognized Russian full-scale aggression against Ukraine. The same applies to the term war in Ukraine, as well at the time when it began. After all, the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine began not on February 24, 2022, but in 2014, February 20. In February 2022 began a new phase of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Russian Federation's full-scale aggression against Ukraine. Moreover, Ukrainians shouldn't be mentioned as refugees, but rather temporarily displaced people, as recognized both by EU decree and Ukrainian legislation. It is important
Can
to
you
know,
draw your remarks to a
that
close, please?
responsibility. Responsibility for violating the law of war can be collective and individual responsibility of specific offenders. The investigation of war crimes and bringing the perpetrators to justice is fundamental to the protection of human rights violated during the war. And this is not only the obligation of states under international humanitarian law, but also an opportunity to establish the truth in an objective, complete,
Thank you,
and
Madam
proper
Komienko.
judicial protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we move on to Madam Ghazarian. Is she here?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, dear colleagues. At the beginning of the 20th century, the movement for women's right to vote was spreading worldwide. And I'm very happy to say that Armenia was already having success. In 1919, the first direct parliamentarian elections were held under the universal suffrage. Every person over the age of 20 had the right to vote, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or religious belief. 3 deputies, female deputies, were in the parliament, and among them, Refugee Barsegyan, whose grandchild many of you would recognize. The city mayor of Strasbourg, Jean Barsegyan, was granddaughter of her. Diana Abgar, another Armenian strong woman, took a different path to public life. On July 2nd, 1920, she was appointed Armenia's envoy to Japan. Serving until 1921, she ranked as one of the world's first female ambassadors. Nowadays, currently in our parliament, women's representation is higher than ever, but still not enough, 35%. Highly appreciating the role of women, civil society organizations, we are actively engaged with them in the lawmaking process, so that will lead to even more women's participation in the legislative bodies. Having peace agenda as one of the main agendas for our ruling party, I can reassure that women MPs are also engaged in the decision-making processes. The Republic of Armenia has also developed the second National Action Plan on the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, reaffirming its readiness to continue its work on peace and security. The program addresses the issues and challenges faced by women displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh as a result of the devastating war unleashed by Azerbaijan against Nagorno-Karabakh in the fall of 2020. As a result of the aggressive war, more than 91,000 people were forcibly displaced and received asylum in Armenia, and 88% of whom were women and children. The war of aggression started during the COVID pandemic, thus complicating the difficult situation for women and girls. The program presents the problems of women and girls in crisis, addressing their security component. The program addresses the issue of forcibly displaced women, the security challenges posed by the new border situation and their impact on women and girls. Considering the above mentioned, I need to be very sincere and to tell you that I'm very much surprised to hear how our women colleagues here at the PACE and other high-level female officials in the neighboring countries can speak in support of war and violence, finding justifications. This should not be acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we move to Madame Yasha.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, je voudrais remercier le rapporteur pour son brillant travail sur ce sujet délicat, mais largement ignoré. Cette Assemblée a adopté plusieurs rapports sur les enfants migrants et réfugiés et a travaillé sur les différents aspects de la question ces dernières années. L'agression russe actuelle contre l'Ukraine a une fois de plus révélé que les enfants font partie des groupes les plus vulnérables en matière de migration et qu'ils ont besoin de soins et de protection immédiate. Contrairement à nos expériences précédentes, la plupart des pays ont répondu de manière adéquate à la crise migratoire actuelle et ont ouvert leurs portes aux réfugiés et aux enfants ukrainiens. Türkiye a été l'un des premiers pays à répondre au flux massif de réfugiés du pays. Madame Emine Erdoğan a immédiatement contacté Madame Olena Zelenska et Türkiye a accueilli environ 1200 enfants réfugiés ukrainiens et leurs tuteurs à Antalya. De nombreux autres pays européens ont également mobilisé leurs ressources et accueilli sans tarder de milliards d'enfants. Cependant, il reste encore beaucoup à faire pour les enfants migrants et réfugiés qui ont besoin de soins et de protection particulière. Je pense que ce rapport réussit à élaborer des propositions politiques solides sur la manière dont nous pourrions protéger ces enfants avec des modèles de prise en charge alternatifs. Par ailleurs, je voudrais attirer votre attention sur l'importance du regroupement familial pour les enfants séparés. Alors que nous défendons les intérêts des enfants, nous devons examiner les moyens qui leur permettraient de retrouver leur famille. En outre, une autre mesure importante pour les enfants migrants séparés et leur identification et leur enregistrement par l'État membre concerné. Ceci est crucial pour prévenir leur disparition et les localiser en cas de séparation avec leur famille. Enfin, j'espère que le travail constant de cette Assemblée en faveur des enfants migrants et réfugiés produire des résultats tangibles pour protéger ces enfants des effets néfastes de la guerre et de la migration. Merci.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we move on to Mr. Thorarensen.
Mr. President, I want to thank the rapporteurs. My input is directed to the third report, Justice and Security for Women and Peace Reconciliation. The plight of women and girls in conflict and post-conflict situation continues to be a matter of grave concern. In the aftermath of conflict, violence against women often increases, underlining the importance of rebuilding rule of law institutions. The challenges faced by women in post-conflict situations include getting access to justice, economic opportunities, equal participation of women in peace building, and the continuation of violence against women. Incorporating gender equality in peace building is critical to addressing the violations of the rights of women and girls during armed conflicts and post-conflict settings. Where there is an active participation of women in peace negotiations, peace agreements tend to place greater emphasis on social issues, from tackling poverty to providing basic services and an establishment of transitional mechanisms according to the UN Human Rights Office. The period after conflict is a window of opportunity to build back better, to accelerate gender equality, advance women's empowerment, and promote meaningful participation in all aspects of reconstruction. We can shape a more peaceful and stable world when we engage women and girls throughout the process toward achieving peace. Mr. President, I want to draw your attention to the challenges faced by women who are widowed in the fragile post-conflict context. Around the world, many women are barred in law or in practice from claiming their ownership rights to property in the case of husband's death, the death of a father, or the dissolution of a marriage. In some cases, only the head of household, who is often a man, can formally register property. Women who are widowed by conflict but cannot prove their husband's death can be denied government income support. The Council of Europe must address this injustice. Mr. President, there are many challenges facing women in post-conflict societies. I welcome this important report. As Pope Francis said, we must fight injustice everywhere.
Thank you very much. Now we have Mr. Gomez-Reino.
Presidente, el drama de una guerra nunca trae nada bueno, pero es cierto que debemos de reconocer que la guerra causada por la invasión de Putin a Ucrania sí nos ha traído el inicio de un cambio de paradigma que esperemos que no sea coyuntural y que tenemos que hacer estructural. Un cambio de paradigma en políticas de refugio. Hasta los más reacios al deber humano de dar refugio a quien escapa de la fatalidad o de la guerra no se atreven hoy a hacer otra cosa ante este drama que aceptar que es imprescindible asumir nuestras responsabilidades humanitarias y recibir a quien escapa de una guerra. Y dentro de este desolador drama de la guerra en nuestro continente, esto es una noticia que no es negativa. Tras años de mirar hacia otro lado, ante las muertes en el Mediterráneo, ante la externalización de fronteras, por fin se acepta que nuestra política migratoria y de refugio hasta el momento era equivocada en términos estratégicos y además inaceptable en términos humanitarios. Por lo tanto, además de trabajar para la paz cuanto antes en Ucrania, tenemos que continuar el esfuerzo de continuar acogiendo refugiados, de garantizarles no solo un presente, sino también un futuro de dignidad y paz, sea aquí o sea en su país de origen. Pero la cuestión es, ¿qué pasa entonces con el resto de refugiados, los que no llegan del drama ucraniano? Hay refugiados de primera y hay refugiados de segunda. ¿Alguien con un mínimo de decencia democrática puede decir que tenemos que tratar diferentes a unos refugiados de otros? ¿Acaso los acuerdos fundacionales de este Consejo dicen que los humanos tienen diferentes derechos en función de su color de piel? Entiendo que no, y no encuentro una sola razón objetiva para que tratemos de esta forma, que es la debida a quien huye de la guerra de Ucrania, y no hagamos lo mismo con afganos, con ruandeses, con sirios o con yemeníes. En definitiva, no encuentro una razón objetiva a no ser que en muchos casos, lamentablemente, la política de refugio y migratoria de nuestros países esté impregnada de racismo institucional. Y fíjense, acabo ya con un caso concreto. Ahora mismo, mientras estamos teniendo aquí este debate, ahora mismo en el Mediterráneo, en el medio del Mediterráneo, hay un barco, el Aitamari, un barco de la sociedad civil, un barco vasco de esa sociedad civil que hace lo que muchas veces las administraciones no hacen o no hacemos, que tiene a 112 personas, entre ellas varias mujeres embarazadas, entre ellas varios menores, y que lleva días solicitando un puerto de refugio, un puerto en el que desembarcar. Por lo tanto, yo creo que lo que toca hoy es hablar del Aitamari, decir que este Consejo y que los gobiernos de países miembros de este Consejo, que son países costeros a los que podría llegar ese barco, tienen que abrir de una vez por todas sus puertos y tienen que hacer que no vivamos un nuevo drama en el Mediterráneo, por lo que les estoy explicando. Por lo tanto, abran los puertos al Aitamari y a los refugiados que vienen también de otras guerras exactamente igual de dramáticas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, Mr. Bergeron.
Président, Mesdames, Messieurs les rapporteurs, chers collègues, nous tenons ce débat aujourd'hui au surlendemain de la Journée mondiale des réfugiés. L'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie a, comme le rappelle le rapport présenté par le rapporteur Friedès, provoqué le plus important mouvement de population depuis la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Bien que je reconnaisse volontiers que l'Agence des Nations Unies pour les réfugiés a quelque peu réduit son évaluation globale du nombre de réfugiés ukrainiens, et ce, pour mieux refléter les récents mouvements de réfugiés depuis et vers l'Ukraine, il est tout de même question de 4,8 millions de personnes. Ça dépasse littéralement l'entendement. Heureusement, nombre de pays ont considérablement et promptement réagi et déployé des efforts considérables pour accueillir les Ukrainiens, principalement des Ukrainiennes, fuyant la guerre. Et je ne puis évoquer cette admirable mobilisation sans déplorer le fait que le nombre de réfugiés ukrainiens accueillis jusqu'à présent au Canada n'est toujours pas à la hauteur des attentes. Nous pouvons et nous devons faire plus. Mais il y a une autre statistique dont je voudrais faire état aujourd'hui, 44 millions. Selon David Beasley, directeur exécutif du Programme alimentaire mondial, ce sont 44 millions de personnes, en effet, qui marchent vers la famine en raison du blocus imposé par la Russie aux ports ukrainiens. Or, les silos à grains ukrainiens sont pleins. Et ce sont à terme quelques 400 millions de personnes qui comptent sur cet approvisionnement. Selon certaines informations extrêmement préoccupantes, la Russie irait même jusqu'à s'approprier d'importantes quantités de blé ukrainien. Le programme alimentaire précise que dans des pays tels que l'Afghanistan, l'Éthiopie, le Soudan du Sud, la Syrie et le Yémen, des millions de personnes sont au bord du gouffre. Le président Zelensky avait raison lorsqu'il a déclaré au début du mois que la poursuite du blocus des ports ukrainiens pourrait entraîner une crise migratoire massive en Europe, puisque les personnes souffrant de la famine voudront trouver refuge ailleurs. Je salue donc les efforts déployés par les Nations unies et un certain nombre de pays pour tenter de dénouer l'impasse et de mettre un terme au blocus. Cela dit, avec les rapports faisant état d'attaques de la Russie contre l'infrastructure céréalière de l'Ukraine et son vil marchandage qui conditionne la fin du blocus au retrait des sanctions, je crains que nous ne soyons face à une impasse. Il apparaît de plus en plus clair qu'une crise migratoire provoquée par la famine ne soit pas en effet inattendue et non désirée de l'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie, mais bien un objectif stratégique délibérément poursuivi par cette dernière, auquel cas ce serait tout simplement ignoble. Ce ne serait d'ailleurs pas la première fois que le Kremlin aurait recours à l'arme alimentaire en Ukraine. Le gouvernement russe et le président Poutine ont bien tenté de nier la chose, mais il y a déjà un certain temps qu'ils ont perdu toute crédibilité. Ils sont directement responsables de ce scénario catastrophique qui se dessine à l'horizon et nous ne saurions laisser la propagande et la désinformation russe tenter de cacher ce fait. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci, monsieur. Merci. Et maintenant c'est monsieur Lacroix. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Voilà, ça fonctionne. Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. J'étais surpris parce que je pensais qu'il y avait encore un peu d'intervenants avant moi. Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, il est maintenant devenu évident que le nombre de violences sexuelles et de viols perpétrés par les Russes à l'égard de femmes ukrainiennes est de plus en plus documenté. En outre, les informations sur les difficultés rencontrées par les réfugiés et les déplacés internes ukrainiens en matière d'accès à des soins de santé sexuels et reproductifs en Ukraine et dans les pays limitrophes et de transit dans lesquels ils se trouvent sont très inquiétantes. En effet, le Haut Commissariat aux réfugiés estime que depuis le 24 février, plus de 5 millions d'Ukrainiens ont fui leur pays. Plus de 7 millions d'Ukrainiens sont déplacés à l'intérieur de leur pays et beaucoup d'entre eux se retrouvent toujours dans des zones frappées par les combats. La guerre exerce donc une forte pression sur les soins de santé ukrainiens. Ils risquent de subir des violences sexuelles, des grossesses non planifiées, ainsi que des grossesses et des accouchements à risque. Les défis sont également énormes pour les personnes LGBTQI, en fuite notamment dans les pays tels que la Hongrie et la Pologne, qui criminalisent les minorités sexuelles. Village de Sharia, Irak 2015. Amcha a été enlevée par Daesh, puis offerte à l'un de leurs combattants. Amnesty International nous renseigne sur le fait que des femmes et des filles yézidis ont été achetées comme des esclaves, notamment une maman et une fille de 5 ans qui ont été achetées. Et à un moment donné, le propriétaire de ces esclaves a souhaité punir la fillette en l'attachant à une fenêtre sous une chaleur torride et sans protection et la laisser agoniser sous les yeux de sa maman. Je pense donc qu'il faille remettre urgemment la notion de viol et de violence faite contre les femmes comme arme de guerre en avant. Sujet éminemment préoccupant que mon parti, le Parti socialiste belge, défend par ailleurs depuis longtemps et qui fait d'ailleurs l'objet d'une proposition de résolution que je porte sur ce sujet, sur les femmes en République démocratique du Congo et plus particulièrement dans les Nord et Sud Kivu, régions en proie à des conflits armés depuis près de 30 ans et qui ressurgissent d'ailleurs dangereusement actuellement. Et donc notamment pour toutes ces femmes, tous ces enfants, toutes ces fillettes qui sont martyrisées à l'occasion des violences et des conflits armés, je pense qu'effectivement nous devons agir et je voudrais vraiment remercier les auteurs des différents rapports. La guerre en Ukraine ne doit évidemment pas nous faire oublier les atrocités qui se passent aussi malheureusement ailleurs dans le monde et dont nous devons toutes et tous continuer à nous en préoccuper. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention.
Merci, monsieur. Et maintenant, c'est Nicole Triss. Vous avez la parole, madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les rapporteurs, merci pour vos travaux qui pointent vraiment les désastres de la guerre en Ukraine. Il y aurait tant de choses à dire. Cependant, dans ce débat conjoint, je voudrais plus particulièrement revenir sur la prise en charge des enfants migrants non accompagnés ou séparés. La récente agression de l'Ukraine par la Fédération de Russie a encore été l'occasion de séparer les familles et de jeter de nombreux mineurs non accompagnés sur les routes d'Europe, mineurs qui se retrouvent à la merci de tous les passeurs et de toutes les mafias. Cependant, ce phénomène n'est hélas pas nouveau. Mon pays, la France, le connaît depuis un certain nombre d'années, avec des enfants provenant non pas de l'Est, mais de la rive sud de la Méditerranée. L'Assemblée nationale s'est à de nombreuses reprises penchée sur le sujet à travers des missions d'information et des commissions d'enquête. Quelques principes simples doivent nous guider. D'abord, le mineur non accompagné est un mineur. Il doit donc bénéficier de la protection qui lui est due. Il ne peut y avoir de différence entre les enfants migrants ou les enfants non migrants. Le deuxième principe étant qu'il est absolument nécessaire d'évaluer l'âge de la majorité, et ce, afin de ne pas mettre en danger les enfants en les mélangeant avec des adultes qui, eux, sont concernés par d'autres dispositifs. Il n'y a pas de recette miracle pour l'évaluation de la minorité, je le sais bien, et toutes les idées sont les bienvenues à cet effet. Par ailleurs, il faut renforcer les systèmes d'aide à l'enfance dans nos pays respectifs et la multiplication des solutions de prise en charge au sein d'institutions, mais également dans les familles d'accueil. Et enfin, il est nécessaire de préparer la sortie de cette prise en charge, que ce soit par un retour au sein de la famille d'origine ou simplement par le passage à l'âge d'adulte. Il est tout de même frappant de constater qu'encore aujourd'hui, les anciens enfants non accompagnés sont surreprésentés parmi les adultes sans domicile fixe. Nous avons là encore réellement des efforts à faire. Je suis bien sûr favorable à ces projets de rapport. Ils formulent un certain nombre de propositions et concernant les enfants, notamment avec l'établissement du réseau européen des familles d'accueil. Les parlementaires européens doivent s'en saisir. C'est à mon sens une absolue nécessité. Merci.
Merci, Madame. And now, Petra Bayer.
Thank you very much. Ich möchte erstens einmal allen dreien Berichterstatterinnen gratulieren zu diesen drei wirklich wichtigen Berichten und möchte im Speziellen auf den von Jewgenia Kravtschuk eingehen, weil ich glaube, dass wenn Frauen nicht in den Wiederaufbau von Gesellschaften einbezogen sind, dann ist die Gefahr riesengroß, dass die neuen Gesellschaften genauso ausschauen, wie die alten ausgeschaut haben. Und das sind meistens Gesellschaften, die sich sehr schwer tun, Konflikte zu lösen, sehr schwer tun, zu einer Streitkultur zu kommen, die nicht eine aggressive, sondern eine problemzentrierte ist und die sich sehr schwer tun, wirklich aus dieser Konfliktspirale rauszukommen. Also wir brauchen Fortschritte bei Streitbeilegung, bei Transformation von Konflikten und darum müssen Frauen einfach in allen Phasen der Konfliktlösung und des Friedensaufbaus eine zentrale Rolle spielen. In dem Zusammenhang mag ich der Ukraine sehr, sehr herzlich dazu gratulieren, dass am Montag im Parlament beschlossen worden ist, die Istanbul-Konvention zu ratifizieren. Das ist ein ganz wichtiger Schritt, weil wenn es gute legistische Möglichkeiten gibt, häusliche Gewalt, sexuelle Gewalt gegen Frauen zu begegnen und die zu ahnden, dann hat das auch Auswirkungen auf den Umgang in der Gesellschaft mit Gewalt, ganz generell. Und darum ist das auch so eine wichtige Grundlage. Und Maria und ich haben am Montag schon darüber geredet, es wäre sehr fein, wenn da jetzt noch eine zweite Ratifizierung folgen würde, nämlich die des Römer-Statuts, weil ich bin auch davon überzeugt, dass der Internationale Strafgerichtshof allen Menschen der Ukraine in diesem Konflikt auch den Schutz, den juristischen, legistischen Schutz bieten kann, den sie ganz, ganz dringend brauchen und auch wirklich genießen sollten. Die Resolution 1325 der Vereinten Nationen oder des Sicherheitsrats der Vereinten Nationen gibt uns, glaube ich, eine sehr gute Anleitung dafür, wie Frauen in Konflikten zu mehr Rechten, zu mehr Repräsentanz und auch zu mehr Ressourcen kommen können, wie sie wirklich einbezogen werden, wie sie bemächtigt, befähigt werden, ihr eigenes Schicksal, aber auch das Schicksal ihres Landes, ihrer Gesellschaft, ihrer Gemeinden, ihrer Städte, ihrer Betriebe, was auch immer, mit in die Hand zu nehmen und verbessern zu können. Und noch eine individuelle Anmerkung. Ich werde in den nächsten Monaten an einem Bericht arbeiten zum Thema sexuelle Gewalt in Konflikten und werde mir anschauen, einerseits, wie das mit der Gerichtsbarkeit geht, wie das mit internationalen Verträgen geht, wie es auch gut gelingt, Beweise zu sichern, dass auch wirklich die Vergewaltiger genauso verurteilt werden wie die in der Befehlskette, die da hinwegschauen oder die Befehle sogar geben, aber auch schauen, wie man Opfer sehr konkret juristisch, psychologisch, medizinisch unterstützen kann, ihnen helfen kann. Und ich bin Evgenia sehr dankbar, dass ich da auf Ihren wunderbaren Bericht werde aufbauen können. Alles Gute in der Umsetzung.
Thank you very much. Now we move to Mr. Soboliev.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start my speech and to say thank you for all of you, for politicians, for your governments, for millions of your citizens who is doing all in order to protect Ukrainians, Syrians, and a lot of other nations from the atrocities of the war. Bloody dictator Putin can't even imagine that we will be so united in such circumstances. Now, when a lot of children, women in Europe, find their relatives, really relatives, they never saw these people before, but they open for them houses, they do all, your governments do all in order to protect civilians in your countries. But we had to know and to understand who is responsible for all this. And if we will never remind this, I think it's the most dangerous. Because who started a war in Africa? In Syria, it's the same bloody regime of Putin. But sometimes we keep silence. Who is also responsible? Not only Putin, and we must understand this. The responsibility of those millions of Russian soldiers who came to Ukraine, to Syria, to Africa, who kills people. But it's a responsibility of all those who support in Moscow, in Peter, in other cities, Putin's regime. Not only supporting them on their meetings, but who keep silence also. It's all those responsibility that gave possibility to such bloody dictators as Putin to kill everybody he wants. It's very important to understand that all those people, millions and millions, because if I'll say these figures, cold figures, it's nothing. Because one life of one girl or one boy is more than figures in millions. But it's very important to understand that all these people, not because they want to live in Europe, not in Ukraine. You know that just for a month, more than 3 million Ukrainians returned back home. Not because it was bad hospitality of your citizens, because they want to rebuild their country. Because only our regions became free from Russian invasion, all of them began to return home. So I think these reports, it's the answer on many questions, but we need to do more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we move to Mr. Goncharenko.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, we are discussing humanitarian consequences of this awful war which Russia started against Ukraine. And first of all, like my colleagues, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all people who are supporting Ukrainian refugees. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Vielen Dank. Ačiū. Paldies. Dziękuję bardzo. I want to thank all people who really opened the doors of their homes for everybody who needs it. I want to thank those Polish people who came to the border, waiting for Ukrainians and taking in from the border, people whom they never knew. I want to say mulțumesc to those Romanians who did the same. And that is so touching. Now, even now I am speaking and my heart is beating. Thank you so much. And what does it mean? It means, we often spoke here and in other places about decline of Europe, about problems in European civilization. No, Europe is alive. European civilization is alive. When hundreds of millions of people can sacrifice their lives for other people whom they never knew. It's something unbelievable in human history. It shows us that these core bases, core values inside our civilization, they are alive. And no capitalism, no consumerism, no. They have not killed it and never will kill it because people are alive and their souls are alive. But what is very important also, when people are alive and these values are alive, when we need to see also business social responsible. We need to see politicians also understanding this. I want to tell you a small story. In the southern part of Ukraine, Ukrainian forces took Russian tank in the battle. And I was there with our soldiers, and I was inside this tank, and we saw this T-90, very modern Russian tank, Vladimir, come Putin, like Putin. Yeah, and that was killing Ukrainians. And I came inside the tank, and what did I find there? I find there night vision from France. That is a photo, video on my YouTube account, Twitter, Facebook. Please come and see it. I have this photo with me, Thales Optronique. It was sent to Russia, sold to Russia after 2014, because that was a brand new tank. And that means we found German details in Russian weaponry. We found Swiss details in Russian weaponry. And it means when Germans, French, Swiss people are opening the doors of their homes, some of their companies are sending weapons to kill Ukrainians and to make them refugees. That's something which we could not accept. Never ever. And I address to you, let's stop it. Let's be united in reality. There is no difference between policy and business and economics. It's often said, it's economy like economy, policy like politics like politics. No, we should be integrated with these values in our heart like all Europeans showed to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goncharenko. Now, Madam Ajedo from Portugal.
Qué ricasco. Bien, la verdad es que no es fácil hablar de 3 informes en 3 minutos que, aunque están conectados, son realmente diferentes, así que voy a ser telegráfica. Bien, la invasión rusa evidentemente va a tener consecuencias, y las tiene ya, humanitarias, económicas y geopolíticas, ahora y a futuro, y en Ucrania y también en el resto del mundo. Lo que tendremos que ir viendo es hasta dónde llegan esas consecuencias y cómo las vamos resolviendo y qué respuesta vamos dando. Mujeres. Pues bueno, siempre somos dobles víctimas y además somos utilizadas como armas de guerra. La verdad es que las mujeres en general mantenemos la vida y cuidamos, y en mi pueblo eso se diría que es un trabajo ni agradecido ni pagado. Pero les digo, no es exclusivo de las mujeres. Yo les animo a todos los hombres que están aquí a que prueben, porque saben mantener la vida y saben cuidar. Pero es que las mujeres, además de eso, también sabemos liderar. Y si nos toca pelear, nos peleamos, pero en general resolvemos los conflictos con menos testosterona. Así que yo lo que diría es que perspectiva de género en todas las políticas, en absolutamente todas, y cuanto más igualdad, mejor. Por supuesto, las mujeres en la toma de decisiones. Menores. Pues lo que se ha dicho aquí, lo primero, son niños, son niñas, son adolescentes, y eso es lo que prima, el que sean migrantes, el que estén acompañados o no, el que estén sin referencias familiares, esos solo son adjetivos que no importan. La cuestión es que prima el interés superior del menor. Menor al que hay que proteger, al que hay que apoyar y al que hay que cuidar, y que desde luego en mi país lo que intentamos es quererles. Y entonces nada que añadir a los informes presentados, excepto que creo que hay 2 palabras que los tienen que definir, y tienen que definir todas nuestras actuaciones, que son solidaridad y corresponsabilidad. Pero querría hacer 2 reflexiones. La primera, la situación en Ucrania es terrible, lo tenemos clarísimo, pero tenemos en el mundo miles de Ucranias, muchas de ellas olvidadas, que también tienen consecuencias humanitarias. Entonces, hay que hacer todo lo que se puede por Ucrania, pero no nos podemos olvidar ni poner en la parte de atrás al resto de Ucranias que tenemos en el mundo. Tenemos demasiado trabajo, pero lo tenemos que afrontar. Y la segunda reflexión es que yo creo que tenemos un gran reto y me preocupa. Y me preocupa porque en general los humanos nos saturamos y llegará un momento que nos saturemos de Ucrania también, por desgracia. Pero además de saturarnos, somos más solidarios cuanto menos nos influye directamente las consecuencias de un conflicto. Y claro, yo creo que a lo de Ucrania nos pudiéramos estar acostumbrando y sería terrible, pero es que además cada vez nos influye más directamente. A los ciudadanos de a pie en este momento miramos el suministro energético o dónde está la inflación con el aumento de precios y eso en el día a día nos importa. Así que mi gran preocupación es cómo vamos los políticos a trabajar entre nuestra ciudadanía que defender el orden internacional, los derechos humanos, la palabra frente a la fuerza y la democracia tiene un coste y que tenemos que estar dispuestos a pagarlo. Gracias.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for describing you from Portugal when you're actually from Spain. Now we definitely move to somebody from Portugal. It's Mr. Segorno.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. This joint debate leads us to think and to be proactive in face to the consequences of the migration concerned with the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The President of the Portuguese Parliament declared a few days ago on World Refugee Day that refugees are all those who have to leave their land because their lives are at risk there because of war, violence, persecution, or extreme deprivation. We have an obligation to protect them every day of the year. Nowadays, it is essential to answer the emergency in Ukraine and that Ukrainian people are living now. These real problems must be solved with the solidarity of all European countries. We must congratulate the rapporteur when recognizes the key role of local and regional authorities in addressing the dire humanitarian consequences faced by citizens, aware that needs are best assessed at local and regional sources. Meantime, Portugal has granted temporary protection to more than 42,000 Ukrainians, the vast majority of them being women. Our country has issued more than 37,000 certificates granting a residence permit under the temporary protection regime. This certificate, issued after the National Health Service, Social Security and tax authorities' intervention, enable refugees to start working and access all support. These requests to temporary protection have been authorized for more than 12,000 children and young teens, representing around 30% of total. Of these minors, 700 have arrived in our country without parents or legal representative, cases in which they are being considered to be present or in imminent danger. Portugal is deeply committed to promoting the rights of migrants. Our country has created centers to providing service for migrants. These centers were awarded by the United Nations Public Service Prize in 2019. And this service that migrant women most requested concerned housing, entrance into the labor market, and registration of children. There were 149 centers established to increase migrants' access to this service. Whoever, whenever, wherever, everyone has the right to seek protections from states that practice democracy and the rule of law. Thank you for the floor, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, is Madam Yohakian in the hemicycle? No, I don't think so. Then we go to Madam Boer.
Thank you. And at first, I want to compliment all three rapporteurs for their very relevant reports. Combining the reports underline the urgency of this debate and the coherence between the reports. Several topics are more than once mentioned, underlining that these are important issues. I name a few. The protection, care and support for refugees and displaced persons, and in particular children. The focus on education, and the need for rebuilding society, both literally by rebuilding houses, schools and hospitals, and more figuratively by community and peace building, in which women should play an important role. I fully endorse this, and I fully endorse the resolutions we are voting for today. However, I think that not all humanitarian consequences of the war did get the attention they deserve in the reports discussed today. I think, for example, of the consequences on the access to health care during and after the war, and of the psychological treatment for victims and witnesses of war crimes, and for soldiers when they will come home from the front. I also think of specific or extra severe consequences for vulnerable groups. Also on these issues, Ukraine and Ukrainians living in their country or abroad will need our support, and it would be good to call the member states to also provide this support. And of course, the humanitarian consequences of this war of aggression are numerous, and it is impossible to address them all in a report without making it unreadable. So please do not interpret my contribution as criticism, but rather as a footnote to all your valuable work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we move to Mr. Vardanian.
He's not here.
Not here. Okay, then it is Mr. Ziak.
Dear Mr. Fritz, I want to appreciate your trip to Slovakia and Ukraine after the beginning of the Russia invasion. I'm proud that the Slovakian authorities know how to cooperate and coordinate with each other in helping Ukrainian refugees. I must also appreciate the non-government organization, civic association, and local authorities that have done everything in their power to help the refugees from Ukraine. If I may have a question, I would like to ask how the activity was coordinated with the other international institutions, in particular the United Nations and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Where do you please see the synergy and contribution of international organizations in solving such a complex issue? And finally, I support your report. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a very brief contribution, but thank you very much. Now, is Mr. Hadjukic here? Hadjukovic? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay. Then we move on to Mr. Ramirez Barba. Yeah. Yeah.
Felicito. Muchas gracias. Felicito al Comité de Migración, Refugiados y Desplazados por su propuesta de resolución que busca atender a los niños migrantes no acompañados o separados al llegar a Europa, los cuales, no obstante sus derechos de protección y cuidados especiales, en realidad son detenidos, abandonados en la calle o atrapados en redes de contrabando o trata criminal. Coincidimos en que se debe promover el cuidado alternativo dando prioridad al cuidado familiar y comunitario como la mejor forma de protección de los niños migrantes. Para garantizar el interés superior del niño, las experiencias señalan que el establecimiento de redes de familias de acogida podrían facilitar una mejor respuesta a la situación de los niños inmigrantes que necesitan protección urgente. Para lograr óptimos resultados es importante que se impartan cursos de capacitación basados en los derechos humanos para profesionales y las familias involucradas en el cuidado alternativo de estos niños. Aprovechemos este informe para que esta Asamblea reconozca la valía y los servicios entregados a favor de los niños migrantes por múltiples organizaciones de la sociedad civil de la Unión Europea, como la Fundación Nidos, Metacometa y Cruz Roja Española, por mencionar tan solo algunas, citadas muchas de ellas en este estupendo reporte. Latinoamérica también ha sufrido el impacto crónico de la pobreza, la violencia y el acceso ilimitado a la educación y a la salud, agudizados por la pandemia de la COVID-19. México es ahora un país donde arriban miles de niños migrantes provenientes de países de Centroamérica como Honduras, Guatemala y El Salvador. Según la UNICEF, entre enero y marzo del 2021 se aumentó de 380 a 3.500 niños migrantes, es decir, 9 veces más. En muchos albergues mexicanos, los niños presentan al menos el 30% de la población total migrante. La mitad de ellos, además, viaja sin sus padres, lo que supone la mayor proporción jamás registrada en México. Nuestra ley prohíbe su detención y prioriza su interés superior. Tenemos opciones de cuidado alternativo para la niñez migrante, como los albergues a puertas abiertas, los departamentos especializados y el aquí citado acogimiento familiar. Ponemos a su disposición una guía para su manejo citada en el reporte, diseñada por el Gobierno federal y la Red Latinoamericana de Acogimiento Familiar. Proponemos se destinen recursos públicos para generar mecanismos de seguimiento y evaluación de las acciones del cuidado alternativo con la participación de los observadores internacionales. Estimados colegas, el reto que tenemos en Europa y América Latina es muy grande. El otorgar a los niños migrantes un mejor desarrollo armónico de sus capacidades les brindará sin duda una mayor perspectiva de vida con calidad. Les exhorto a aprobar esta resolución con decisión y México está en apoyo a Ucrania. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias, señor. Madam Vasylenko is next.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, I begin by thanking the 5 rapporteurs, and I would especially like to highlight the efforts of my colleagues from the Ukrainian delegation. I am so proud to see today in the rapporteur seats Ms. Evgenia Kravchuk and Ms. Maria Mezentseva. They have produced a remarkable result and worked through the reports despite extensive participation in humanitarian efforts and war efforts in Ukraine. They are just one example of how Ukrainians have learned to live with war in the background, and in some regions such as Kharkiv, Kherson, Luhansk, Donetsk, very much in the foreground of everyday life. Despite the extra burden of war and responsibility to stop Russia's aggression spreading through Europe, we in Ukraine continue to do our best to function normally and contribute to the development of European society. All in spite of the fact that sometimes we stop to cry at the loss of close friends who are being killed by Russian soldiers, just like we did today with my other colleague, Larissa Bilazir, just before this sitting. And when we cry, we ask, when will all of this end? When will there actually be a never again instead of a yet again? I feel compelled to point out that today we commemorate the Day of Victims of War, of the bloody war which started 8 decades ago on the 22nd of June with the Nazi invasion, at 4 in the morning, and which took the lives of 35 million Europeans, 10 million of whom were Ukrainian. Today, history repeats itself. Just 4 months ago, on 24th of February, at 4 in the morning, Russia escalated its aggression. In 120 days of war, by the most conservative estimates, Russia has taken the lives of at least 15,000 Ukrainians, 324 of them children. But the count still goes on, because the killings go on. As a result of this war, 13 million Ukrainians have been displaced. 8 million internally and 5 million were forced to flee abroad. 2/3 of them are women and children. Statistics shows that 1.3 million have been displaced to Russia. In fact, this displacement is nothing else but illegal deportation happening yet again in the middle of Europe in the middle of the 21st century. The killings, the deportations, the making of Ukraine unlivable is all in fact evidence of Russia committing the crime of crimes against Ukraine, the crime of genocide. Today, 7 members of these organizations have recognized this fact. Poland, Estonia, Latvia, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Ireland, Canada, you have all condemned Russia's acts against Ukraine as genocide, and I thank you for this. I urge the other members of this assembly to follow suit and to recognize Russia's actions as genocide against Ukraine. But most importantly, we must remember that Russia is acting the way it is, committing the crimes, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity, genocide, aggression, just because it has always been allowed to get away with it. It has never been punished for any of the wrongdoings it has committed through history. And it's time to change that. We must restore historical justice. First of all, we can start with the recognition of the 1932-33 Holodomor, the man-made famine induced in Ukraine by Russia as genocide. And then we must go on to punish Russia for all the wrongdoings it has been doing. I end, although there is many more important points that are raised from the reports today, but I end by saying thank you to all the countries who have wholeheartedly opened the doors to Ukrainians and who have welcomed and provided safe haven to the Ukrainian children, the future of Ukraine, and who have helped in so preserving the Ukrainian nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now, Mr. Pisco from Portugal.
Thank you, Chairman. Europe and Ukraine are living a dramatic situation because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russian Federation, with also a flow of displaced persons like we haven't seen since the Second World War. Leaving everything behind, family, friends, and possessions. This means dangers and risks, especially to the most vulnerable, like women, children, young people, and non-accompanied minors, which are the majority of the refugees. International community must be alert and use all its resources to fight against any kind of practices that could hurt human dignity, especially human trafficking and sexual abuse and exploitation. My congratulations to all three rapporteurs for its very important work, full of humanity and worries about to protect fundamental rights and the dignity of life, the core values of the Council of Europe. We know that hosting countries have not all the same capacity to help and support refugees, and even if they are willing to receive them with open arms. Therefore, it is important to follow what is really happening in the field to guarantee the conditions for an adequate treatment in terms of education, healthcare, employment, psychological support, integration. But it is also important to avoid any kind of discrimination that can attain any particular group, either minorities or people from third countries also forced to leave Ukraine because of the war, especially if they are under international protection with the status of refugee, as it is pointed in the report of our colleague Pierre-Alain Frides. This is very critical, for instance, in the accession to medical universities, and is happening in some countries, also in my country, in Portugal, which I'm sorry, even take into consideration the autonomy of the universities. While Ukrainian people are having a more easy way to get its inscription for studying, which is very positive, other students from third countries are facing big difficulties to be accepted, even being under international protection. No discrimination is acceptable, even more when they go against international treaties. I also would like to call your attention to another kind of displaced persons, those who have been taken by force to territories of Russian Federation or under control of pro-Russian armies. Nobody knows exactly how many they are, where they are, and in which conditions they are, although the existence in some cases of information about attempts to Russification and bad treatments and even torture. This is very worrying, and the Council of Europe should know more about this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we go to Mr. Cagliari.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to commend the rapporteurs, the Secretariat, and everybody involved in these reports, and particularly to commend our Ukrainian colleagues. To be a rapporteur at any stage for a PACE report is quite a task. To take it on at a time of such national and personal challenge, we are particularly grateful to you. Mr. Chairman, as this debate proceeded, the Irish Times published a story online about a 12-year-old Ukrainian girl who came from Kharkiv with her grandmother. She was accompanied to Dublin after some traumatic journey. And she chronicled that journey, and she's publishing a book in the autumn of this year of her chronicle. And the book will be called "You Don't Know What War Is: The Diary of a Young Girl from Ukraine. And she says in that, as after her journey, everyone knows what the word war means, but practically no one knows what this word really represents. And let's bear that quote from a 12-year-old accompanied in mind as we discuss this report here this evening. Because reports can seem, we debate so many, but that is the word of somebody who took the journey, who went through the experience, and who now has the courage to share that experience. And we will bring that to you here when we meet again in October. In relation to the second report on justice and security for women and peace reconciliation, that is required reading for our high-level group as they reflect on the role. All three reports are actually required reading for the high-level group as they reflect on the role of the Council of Europe. But I note in the migration report, in the third report, that it refers to the role of the Council of Europe Development Bank as it begins to rebuild Ukraine, and it is essential that we have that ambition and that urgency. But why not link that funding to the findings of the second report? That unless our female parliamentarians, who have been so brave here since the 24th of February, unless they are represented in rebuilding Ukraine, unless every sector of the Ukrainian population is represented in rebuilding Ukraine, in rebuilding any country that has come from a war, their funding should be linked to full representation and full equality. And I draw attention again to the statistic in the proposed amendments from the 2015 United Nations Security Council recommendation that found that women's participation increases by 35% the probability of a peace agreement lasting 15 years. That's a statistic that nobody can deny, and we have to make this real. Finally, Chair, I think the full migration report, the role of reopening our office in Kyiv is essential to all of these three reports, to have an on-the-ground presence, to have a presence of ambition on behalf of the Council of Europe. As I said at the beginning, all three reports should go to the high-level report. This is what the Council of Europe is about. It may be lost its mission, but it can refine its mission by implementing and pursuing these reports in the finest traditions of this institution. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we go to Madam Martinez-Sejo.
Thank you, President. Spain has a long history of hosting unaccompanied migrant children, mainly coming from Africa, whose gateway to Spain and Europe is usually through the south of Spain or the Canary Islands. A figure of nearly 9,000 children who are alone. We do have experience, and that's why we agree with this report that seeks to guarantee basic and necessary care for children who are alone. Indeed, there are basic needs that member states must provide, all stated in the report, but there is a missing and essential lack, the right to education, which is not included. This is a basic right. Education helps to normalize migrant children's situation. That is a remarkable means for integration. That's why I have suggested an amendment that I hope I will count with your support. Children care requires an enormous coordination between the different public administration of member states. For instance, in Spain, financing and coordination procedures have been established at the different critical moments of massive reception of children coming alone, to balance the distribution of children and adapt it to the capacity of the different regions and their resources. For us, the great challenge that lies ahead is to adopt a reception system that allows a real integration for those children who will permanently stay in and lay the channels for the transition to adult life in the host country. Now we are facing an unexpected situation shared by all the countries in Europe. We cannot ignore the dramatic crisis that the cruel invasion of Ukraine has brought to millions of people. The exodus of millions of Ukrainians to other countries has meant the necessary adaptation of our social and educational systems to provide a response to thousands of children who have arrived in our countries. And we must ensure the learning process and the link with other children of their age. The drama they have experienced is out of imagination. Without a doubt, financial help is necessary to provide care, but in my opinion, psychological support is essential in a difficult process not lived before. leaving their homes, the horror of a war, death, and arriving to a strange country with a different culture and language. We can all imagine the harshness of the situation that these children go through. My last words appeal to our responsibility as politicians, but mainly as human beings. We must not allow the differentiation that the extreme right wants to make of migrant children. Origin or race cannot be excuses to deprive children of rights. We must not give in to the demand of the extreme right to care only for European children, but to exclude children coming from Africa or other continents from protection. We must never forget the rights of children, and we must do our best to preserve them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, Madam Bilozir.
Dear Mr. President, dear colleagues, the three reports on humanitarian consequences of war, on people fleeing the war, refugee children, women, are of utmost importance. As the war in Ukraine has caused the largest and fastest displacement of people in Europe, almost 40% of Ukrainians fled the war and became displaced persons internally and externally. We all see how many lives, homes, jobs and hopes were destroyed in the last 190 days of full-scale war. I want to thank reporters Maria Mezentseva, Evgenia Kravchuk, Pierre-Alain Fride for enormous work they have done, not only by preparing this report, but also so much that they have done on practice to protect the most vulnerable people, children and women. Maria, all her time, when she is not on diplomatic front, she spent her time in constituency in Kharkiv, despite of severe bombing, helping people, bringing them food and medicine. Today, Kharkiv is under severe attacks. Only yesterday, 15 people were killed, and including a child. And while her heart is broken, she still managed to stand before you with her report on children migrants. Evgenia is the one that stands for women's rights and contributes a lot in our parliament, that the voice of women would be heard. With Pierre-Alain Fride, we would go to bomb shelters together during the alarm sirens as he was visiting Ukraine while he was writing this report. This war brings people closer than ever. While Russian enemy came to our home trying to delete from Earth and map my country with cassette, vacuum, thermobaric, phosphorus, bombs and missiles forbidden by the Geneva Convention, if we will not stop Putin together by fighting, isolating Russia and providing Ukraine with necessary weapons, I'm sure there will be more biological, chemical, nuclear weapons. There will be more displaced persons, killed children, destroyed hospitals, schools, churches, short columns of refugees. In April, I was standing before you and telling you that we have already 10,000 residential houses destroyed. Now it's 20,000. Almost 1 million people lost their homes. 324 children killed. What is not a genocide? Among the signs of genocide are filtration camps and forced deportation of children. And last, what I wanted to say, to thank you, to say the gratitude thanks for all members of Council of Europe for helping our children. This is where we are. We are part of this free world, real world, and this is what we fight for. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, do we have Madame Gonaj in the hemicycle? No? No? Then I move back to Canada and Madame Zahid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. President, esteemed colleagues and fellow parliamentarians. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to these critical, important topics today: the woman, peace and security. agenda is now more than 20 years old. The notion that peace processes and political reconciliation need to incorporate women and account for the gendered effects of conflict has since become an established principle in international peace studies. And we have seen progress. Between 1992 to 2019, 13% of peace negotiators were women. But in 2020, women represented 23% of delegates in UN-supported peace processes. Yet these numbers can and should leave us underwhelmed. Significant progress is still required. For example, while a quarter of national parliamentarians around the world are women, the percentage is less than 20% in post-conflict countries, showing that women still struggle for a political voice during peace and reconciliation period. We need to keep moving forward because 20 years of experience has only reaffirmed what supporters of women, peace, and security knew from the start, that the involvement of women in peace processes and political reconciliation leads to better outcomes for everyone. We know that the participation of women and civil society makes peace agreements more durable and less likely to fail, that high rates of gender equality are associated with low rates of conflict, both between and within states. I'm proud to say that Canada has been a world leader in advancing the agenda since its inception. Canada voted for Resolution 1325 when we last served on the UN Security Council in 2000, and we are currently implementing our second National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. As part of the plan, Canada appointed its first ambassador for Women, Peace and Security in 2019. With a whole-of-government mandate to advise on and support Canada's action, plan, implementation, Ambassador Jacqueline O'Neill has assisted government departments and Canada's missions abroad while also representing Canada internationally, including promoting the implementation of national action plans in partner countries. As we witness the grave humanitarian consequences of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, the importance of the value that anchor the women, peace, and security agenda become clear. A rapid gender analysis of conflict by CARE and UN Women found that the conflict exacerbated existing gender inequalities in Ukraine and that women activists, journalists, and human rights defenders were at an increased risk of persecution. Despite this, the report also noted that women were playing a crucial role in the humanitarian response. As we continue to address the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine and look to the possibility of a peaceful resolution to the conflict, we must place the principles of the Women, Peace and Security agenda at the center of our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Madam Hopsu. Is she here?
Mr. President, dear colleagues, first I would like to thank the rapporteurs for these excellent reports. UNICEF estimates that there were about 36 million migrant children in 2020, fleeing war, climate change, or perhaps leaving their homes in the hope of a better future. Whatever the reason, a child is still only a child, in need of protection, care, and support. I am especially pleased that Ms. Metsenseva's report focuses on the care and leaving care for unaccompanied migrant children. Experiences of war, displacement, and migration in childhood can become an intergenerational trauma for both children and parents, passed on the future generations. Therefore, long-term transition plans are vital to support refugee children in their integration after reaching adulthood. I fully agree that whenever possible, reuniting children with their families should be our top priority. It is important for a child's balanced development to be able to establish safe and lasting relationships with close caregivers, and for a child's linguistic development to be able to speak and study their own mother tongue. These ingredients give child a better foundation to cope with the uncertainty that fleeing home certainly brings to one's life. As an example, let me share with you the experiences of Finnish war children. During the Second World War, nearly 80,000 unaccompanied children aged 1 to 14 were evacuated from Finland to our neighboring Nordic countries. Their stories underline the profound effects of displacement on their families, friends, relatives, and schools. On the other hand, their stories show how strong their relationships to their new families and new countries had become. Many Finnish children experienced a new trauma when pulled away from their new siblings, new, often wealthier homes, schools, and new language. Many of them had forgotten Finnish, their mother tongue. Children's well-being depends on more than sufficient food, care, and safe circumstances. To support their psychological development, children need safe and stable relationships with their carers. For the children's linguistical development, it is important to be able to speak your native language. When we make decisions on today's war children and refugees, we could take advantage of research done and the lessons learned from the experiences, stories, and destinies of Finnish war children and their families. Thank you.
Thank you too. Now the floor is for Ms. Kempi from Finland.
Mr. President and dear colleagues, I want to thank you for the excellent report on women in peace recognition. Although I found the message of the report very important, I hope for more concrete proposals. The war in Ukraine has reminded us that there are very few women in leading of security policy or business roles. Of the leaders of Europe's largest companies, only 10% are women. And we saw it in our parliaments. Most of the experts heard in relation to the war in Ukraine were men. This is nothing to be proud of. It must be said that the catalogue of war and peace is very masculine and manly, and women need to be empowered and encouraged more. The aim of the UN resolution, Women, Peace and Security, is to strengthen the role and empower women in conflict prevention, ending war and building peace, as well as increasing women's security. In 2016, 14% of the crisis management experts Finland sent abroad were women, but the average of European Union is still 20%. We must continue to endorse this resolution. This process should involve all in society. We should also discuss the importance of teaching preparedness skills and allowing women to take part in military service. Finland is finally piloting female conscriptions. I think that is important not to separate women and men in military service, as it helps in changing the masculine view of peace and security. Thank you for the report about mentioning this. We also need more efforts to stop violence against women. The war in Ukraine has showed us that the raw force against women and children is still used as a weapon of welfare. Tackling sexual violence should be an integral part of peace processes. I welcome the ratification of the Istanbul Convention by Ukraine, and which shows that even in the middle of war, it is possible to make a change for women and to advance human rights protection. Research shows that including women improves the chances of achieving a peace agreement as well as durable peace. We must strengthen the inclusion of women in official peace negotiations and high-level decision-making forums. I support the amendments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kempi. Now is Ms. Selnes. The floor is yours.
President, first of all, let me thank the rapporteurs for presenting these important and timely reports. Millions of people are being forced to flee Ukraine due to war. Such a massive movement of people who unwillingly must stop their lives temporarily is a first in Europe in our time. All the countries that receive and welcome the Ukrainian refugees must make sure that they take the necessary steps so that the refugees have the possibility to live fulfilling lives in dignity when living outside their own country. The Norwegian government has granted temporarily collective protection for refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine. Refugees with temporary collective protection are granted a residence permit in Norway. So far, 20,000 refugees have arrived in Norway. Even if it's challenging both for the refugees and the hosting countries not to know for how long the displacement will last, it is important that we provide opportunities so that they can live rich and complete lives. The Norwegian government has taken several steps in order to do this, steps that are also outlined in the report of Mr. Frides. Displaced people and refugees from Ukraine must receive the assistance they need to live in dignity and be given the possibility to face the future. The Norwegian government is providing financing to universities and institutions of higher education so that they can admit 1,000 new students from Ukraine. For the Norwegian government, it is important that refugees from Ukraine who want to pursue higher education while they are in Norway get the opportunity to do so. This is one example that illustrates the wide range of measures you need to consider in order to provide for a diverse group of Ukrainian refugees. President, in solidarity and respect for refugees coming from Ukraine, we must act now and at the same time keep a longer perspective in mind. For as long as it is needed, we must make it possible to live rich and complete lives in the best possible way. Solidarity with Ukraine from Norway. Thank you.
Thank you too. Now, and to Norwegian government also. Now another speaker from Norway, Ms. Christoffersen. The floor is hers. Okay.
Mr. President and dear colleagues, in this joint debate, we have three important reports in connection with the Russian aggressive warfare against Ukraine. I would like to comment on the first one. Let me thank our rapporteur, Mr. Frides, for presenting a report with very specific recommendations and points of action targeted at Ukraine itself, neighboring countries and countries a little further afield. In fact, Mr. Frides has provided us with a checklist most useful in our, in our national parliaments. We have all opened our borders for people fleeing bombing and terror. Nevertheless, Ukraine itself and some neighboring countries share the heaviest burden and need our assistance. As the report correctly underlines, the humanitarian consequences of the war will not be resolved in the short term. For this reason, it's very important that our member states ensure their continued long-term coordinated support. Refugees and displaced persons need a guarantee that they will get all necessary assistance to live in dignity. We also have the duty to reassure all Ukrainians hope for the future. We must show them that we will stand by as time comes for reconstruction. That is in our common interest. Coordinated preparations should start immediately. Meanwhile, we must offer necessary humanitarian crisis management of high quality with a special focus on the most vulnerable, women, children, third country nationals, stateless people and Roma. Our health services have to prepare for receiving people with severe trauma, among them women and children who are victims of sexual warfare. We need special focus on protecting people against trafficking and other forms of exploitation. We need proper housing, good facilitating in schools and kindergartens, mobilizing of civil society to integrate refugees in our local communities. Last but not least, we should not forget that those who have fled Ukraine are competent people with qualifications needed in our societies. In Norway, for instance, we are short of labor. To the benefit of all, we should pay far more attention in making a perfect match between Ukrainian refugees and their diaspora associations, employers, sport teams, cultural organizations, and other organizations in local civil society. That is also in our best common interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Christopherson. Now, is Lord Andrew Adonis in the hall?
Mr. President.
The floor is yours.
Mr. President, we can and should do more to help Ukrainian refugees. 15 million Ukrainians have been displaced either internally or forced to seek sanctuary abroad since Russia invaded Ukraine 4 months ago, and there are good recommendations in these reports about what they need. However, the single biggest contribution we can make to the plight of refugees is to help Ukraine to win this war of aggression started by Putin's Russia and send the invaders back home. Our colleague Alexei Goncharenko, in his two brilliant speeches today and yesterday, set out the case compellingly, and in particular that in Putin's Russia we are dealing with a zombie empire attacking its neighbours to keep itself alive. We cannot allow this zombie empire to tyrannize its neighbours in a continuing fashion, and it is deeply concerning that promises of European and US military support for President Zelensky's government have not always resulted in the delivery of the necessary equipment and assistance that are needed urgently now to limit the flow of refugees. Mr. President, we need to see NATO and the Council of Europe as two sides of the same coin, European power and European values working together in tackling this dictatorship. They were founded together in the wake of the Second World War to keep Europe free and democratic, and they need to work together much more closely. For example, I think there should be a joint meeting of the parliamentary assemblies of the European Council and NATO. The next biggest contribution we can make to enabling refugees to return to Ukraine is to win the peace which follows this war. Building on their membership of the European Council, Ukraine should be brought into the EU and in due course also into NATO as soon as possible as part of a new European order to end Russian imperialism in Europe. We are in this crisis, Mr. President, because of 20 years of half measures in resisting Putin's imperialism. And if we're going to end it and avoid a long, ongoing refugee crisis that will mar the next 30 years and not enable many of these 15 million to return to their homeland, then the time for half measures is surely over. Yesterday, we welcomed the Irish presidency and the Irish Foreign Minister. I'm reminded of those inspirational lines of the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. In helping Ukraine win this war and win the peace and enable refugees to return, this could be one of Europe's moments when the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. And we should pray that that is the case.
Thank you, Mr. Adonis. As a member of NATO PA, I found your proposal very positive on mutual work. Now we should, is Mrs. Oshiankova online? Let's connect her from Ukraine. We cannot hear you.
Frites, are you hearing me?
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, first of all, thank you very much to Maria, Evgenia, and Mr. Frides for the excellent words. The largest tragedy in Europe, the biggest humanitarian catastrophe since Second World War, was unfolded before our eyes. Bomb shelling, delivering the large territory with the ground served destruction, hundreds of killed, thousands are kidnapped or captured. Millions lost their homes and displaced. I don't have home. This song became a symbol of this terrible tragedy of humanity in the 21st century. I personally know what it literally means. I know how each word, its report, each number illustrated from the report look like. I have been an internally displaced person since 2014, when together with my Vasilistus University, I left Donetsk. I left my life behind and started a new beginning with my university in Vinnytsia. I started new projects for internally displaced persons, advocating for education for this life on the territory of independent and European Ukraine, and study in the Ukraine universities and professional education institutions. I understand what has been going on there for 8 years. Since February 2022, the Russian Federation has brought great sorrow to my country, to entire democratic European world. Every day the war brings more and more grief and death to our country, where the free people defend their right to live in a sovereign country and prove their European choice. With tears in my eyes, I am truly happy and grateful to you, colleagues, because the greatest support for our country, help us, and protection for citizens in need to ensure it by the member states and Council of Europe. You and your countries at this particular moment are standing with Ukraine and their best to create conditions and have to shelters and continue living their lives on peaceful territory. But we as the members of Parliamentary Assembly need to be closer to them and communicate with the forced migrants to be more there with lives and needs. Ukrainian children need to learn the Ukrainian language, grow up in the Ukrainian culture, as well as in your national cultures. Adults need to learn the local language and find employment. Teenagers and young people should have space to meet, so your center and hubs could engage them more. The reports highlight one of the major challenges for refugees from Ukraine, which is the recognition of their qualification and professional rights in the regarded profession. I hope that European qualification passport for refugees will come into force soon and make a significant change, not only for refugees for Ukraine, but in general in the political refuge. The war will cost Ukraine a lot, but the price is high. It's about the civilization choice for the next generation, for the whole world. The humanitarian price, the environmental and economical cost cannot be counted. But I believe that the global solidarity and togetherness will ensure implementation of the proposed measures that will help to minimize the damage and support Ukrainians in their communities. Russian Federation must be taken to responsibility as world criminal for the global humanitarian crisis and genocide in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine, glory to Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. Greetings and applaud from Hemicycle on behalf of all delegations. And look forward to see you here. Now, may I invite Ms. Pena Escalante from Mexico to take the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. En la sesión extraordinaria de marzo pasado en este hemiciclo establecí la postura de la Cámara de Diputados de México, la cual está en concordancia con el posicionamiento del gobierno mexicano en torno a la condena de la invasión rusa a Ucrania. Vemos con gran consternación las miles de vidas que esta guerra ha ocasionado en los umbrales del siglo XXI. Algo que estaba fuera de toda lógica cuando el mundo se enfrentaba a una de las pandemias más devastadoras de la historia moderna, así como a una de las más arreciantes crisis económicas que ya invadían a toda la geografía en el mundo. De mi permanencia en la ciudad de Estrasburgo, me llevé un par de tareas para contribuir a la discusión sobre este flagelo del siglo XXI. En principio, se mantuvo un diálogo con alcaldes de ciudades ucranianas y, en segundo, convoqué a un foro internacional para abordar los efectos de desplazamiento y refugio de personas que se está dando tanto en el interior de Ucrania y aquel hacia otras naciones de distintos continentes, para identificar cómo responde a este desafío la política intercultural. Este evento llevó el acompañamiento del programa Ciudades Interculturales del Consejo de Europa, programa con el que llevamos más de 10 años colaborando. La invasión tiene implicaciones de distinta índole. La separación de millones de familias ha provocado grandes oleadas de personas, principalmente niñas, niños, adolescentes, mujeres y adultos mayores. No han tenido otra opción que huir de la situación con el único fin que salvar sus vidas. Quienes han permanecido en territorio ucraniano, principalmente en las zonas ocupadas, deben hallar las condiciones para seguir con vida. Esto ha generado un desplazamiento interno con números insospechados. El respeto de los derechos humanos con base en diversos mecanismos internacionales se ha violado reiteradamente. Los primeros receptores de las olas de desplazamiento hacia otras naciones, que hasta la fecha son ya más de 6.5 millones de personas obligadas a huir de sus lugares de origen, que se suman a las desplazadas internamente. A pesar de que entre México y Ucrania existen cerca de 12.000 kilómetros de distancia, no estamos ajenos a la situación imperante en la zona de guerra. Primero, porque tiene el compromiso insoslayable de resguardar la seguridad de sus ciudadanos. Y segundo, porque en el marco de nuestra política exterior están guiadas por mandato constitucional. Con base en ello es que ya tenemos pláticas con la embajadora de Ucrania en México para abrir un consulado en la ciudad de Hermosillo, ciudad de la cual fui electa, dada la cercanía que se tiene con la Unión Americana y ser punto de tránsito de migrantes. El futuro de Europa y del mundo entero se concentra en lo que hoy sucede en Ucrania. Por eso, cualquier esfuerzo por ayudar y comprender la situación abona la condición humana que hoy más que nunca se requiere. Es cuanto, señor presidente.
Thanks for the statement and for the attendance from far away. Now may I invite Ms. Lovochkina from Ukraine.
Chair, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all rapporteurs who have examined sensitive issues both for Ukrainian people, Ukraine, and every member of our European family. I would also like to thank every European citizen for standing shoulder to shoulder with us and lending your hands to the Ukrainian people. The Russian war on Ukraine is the biggest armed clash in Europe after World War II. The unbearable ordeal Ukrainian people are going through is primarily taking its tragic toll on people's lives. In particular, more than 12 million Ukrainians were forced to flee their homes, whether displaced inside the country or fled across borders as refugees. Children, parents, couples, relatives are separated. It is unknown how many individuals have lost and will lose their lives and are never reunited with their loved ones. Since 2014, the issue of internally displaced Ukrainians has been on the Assembly's agenda. Now the situation is drastically changed. Ukraine, like the rest of Europe, is dealing with an unprecedented displacement crisis in its recent history. A lot has been said, and I don't really want to repeat my colleagues and everyone who's spoken. I would like to draw your attention to several issues. Impacts on education. The war has disrupted the education of 7.5 million children, this is our children population, who were living in Ukraine at the start of 2022. At least 1,900 schools have been damaged or destroyed by shelling and bombardments. And we understand that lack of education is a long-lasting consequence for our child population. Impact on health. The risk of disease outbreaks such as cholera, measles, diphtheria, or even COVID-19 is growing due to the lack of access to water, sanitization, hygiene, crowd conditions in bomb shelters and collective centers. And we know that none of the diseases could be contained within country. We learned it with COVID. Financial difficulties. It is directly connected to our every children and every family. Financial insecurity due to job loss, increased prices for food and fuel, and in case of displacement, increase in rent prices is one of the most common challenges for the entire population of Ukraine, and we also have to consider that. As it is set out in the Pierre Allen's report, there is a drastic need into humanitarian crisis management action plan. Organization of social housing, integration in society, the enrollment of children in schools, social protection, health and psychological support, access to employment, support programs, and many, many other things. And I think this plan should be very well coordinated among all actors, European countries, Ukraine, and individuals and organizations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you too. Now may I give the floor to Mr. Palke from Germany.
Dear Mr. President, dear Pierre-Alain, thank you so much for your excellent report. I'm glad that we're finally having the chance to focus on the important details of protection for people on the move, especially after the last years of injustice against those fleeing. The injustice on the Mediterranean, the people drowning, the injustice on the Aegean Islands, and of course, the injustice of the people drowning on the route towards the Canary Islands. The grade of protection is unique within the European countries. This temporary protection directive is the first time in 21 years that we're proving that we can keep our humane face. Now we need to take care of those. Now we need to take care that nobody is played out against each other. And because nobody deserves that, neither the Ukrainians nor third country nationals, because the bombs are falling on everyone equally. But we also need to focus on the humanitarian consequences and how Ukraine can be rebuilt, because I'm sure of one thing, that Ukraine will win this war. But until then, we need to focus on the protection of the children, of the protection of the disabled, and of course, on the protection of third country nationals. Because we need to overcome this underlying racism within the European system, where people are being treated differently by the color of their skin or by their passport. We need to overcome this blatant racism at our borders, where people are being discriminated, where access to protection is being denied. Because it is not exceptional what the European countries have been doing. It seems exceptional, because we're ultimately acting humane towards those seeking protection. Thank you.
Thank you, especially for the emphasis against discrimination among migrants and refugees. Now may I invite Mr. Schennak from Austria to take the floor.
Danke sehr, Herr Präsident. Österreich ist ein neutrales Land und wird auch neutral bleiben. 75% der Bevölkerung bis 85 wollen das so und das wird auch so bleiben. Das heißt aber nicht, dass wir nicht unsere Stimme erheben und dass wir nicht im Bereich der Humanität und dem Flüchtlingswesen eine Großmacht sind. Und ich danke allen Autoren dieser Berichte für deren Inhalt. Und wir haben versucht, in Österreich spezielle Akzente zu setzen. Da gab es ein Heim in der Ukraine für mental und physical gehandicapte Kinder. Und wir haben alle Kinder in einem samt dem Personal, weil gerade mental handicapped Kinder keinen Wechsel verstehen können. Wir haben sie alle übernommen, das Personal und die Kinder. In Tirol sind jetzt 300 behinderte Kinder aus der Ukraine und damit sie nicht eine lange Flucht haben, haben wir Busse in die Ukraine geschickt, die alle abgeholt haben. Und wir haben Moldawien geholfen und haben 200.000 ukrainische Flüchtlinge aus Moldawien geholt, weil das kleine und auch bedrängte Moldawien dazu in der Form gar nicht in der Lage ist. Und wir sind sehr froh, dass die EU entschieden hat, dass wir keine Flüchtlingsverfahren machen müssen, sondern dass wir Vertriebenenstatus haben. Das bedeutet, jeder Flüchtling aus der Ukraine, egal ob Kind, Erwachsen, bekommt sofortigen Aufenthalt und sofortige medizinische Hilfe. Und die Kinder bekommen sofort die Möglichkeit, in die Schulen zu besuchen und das auf die nächsten 3 Jahre. Ich glaube, dass das schafft eine große Sicherheit. Wir dürfen nur nicht übersehen, dass wir auch viele andere Flüchtlinge haben und wir wollen keine Zweiklassengesellschaft unter Menschen, die Hilfe benötigen. Das heißt, es muss sowohl die Hilfe für die Vertriebenen aus der Ukraine, aber es muss auch Hilfe für Menschen auf der Flucht aus anderen Teilen der Welt geben. Und das ist uns besonders wichtig. Und gerade in letzter Zeit haben wir einen vermehrten Zustrom von Flüchtlingen aus Syrien, aus Afghanistan bekommen. Und wir werden auch dieses schaffen, um einen berühmten Satz zu zitieren, einer deutschen früheren Politikerin. Das heißt, noch einmal, auch der Fokus, dass gerade bei Frauen ganz sensibel und vorsichtig umgegangen und vor allem bei unbegleiteten minderjährigen Flüchtlingen, all das ist richtig und ich bedanke mich und ich hoffe, diese Resolutionen werden eine hohe Einstimmigkeit erfahren. Danke.
Thank you, sir. Now, may I invite Mr. Francesco Sorbara from Canada. The floor is yours with thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, buonasera to all my honorable colleagues and parliamentarians. I'm honored to be here today to speak to the humanitarian consequences of migration caused by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I would first like to congratulate those in the room and all the member states who have already done so much to help the Ukrainian people. We Canadians have watched in admiration at the incredible generosity that Ukraine's neighbors have shown to people fleeing the barbaric attacks on their country. You are the first step in what has become a global effort to help the Ukrainian people. Witnessing such generosity is to see the values of the Council of Europe in action. It is an affirmation of the power of these values when they are needed most, and the strongest argument against the falsehoods put forward by the Russian government as justifications for its actions. When Ukrainians sought safety, compassion, and understanding, they headed west, not east, towards Europe, not away from it. We in Canada are proud to help in these efforts. Since the start of the war, the Canadian government has approved over 125,000 applications by Ukrainians for emergency travel to Canada. Canada has also committed $245 million in humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and offered over $600 million in loans to the Ukrainian government. The government of Canada has chartered flights for those needing help coming to Canada and worked with partners to launch the Ukraine to Canada Travel Fund, which allows Canadians to donate airline reward points toward the travel costs of Ukrainians. The fund has a goal of helping 10,000 Ukrainians come to Canada. As we continue to watch the war in Ukraine grind on and witness the increasing destruction of Ukrainian towns and cities, we must look to how we can support Ukrainian migrants over the longer term. Simply, some of those who have fled no longer have a home to return to. Some will choose to stay in the places that have welcomed them, and they should be supported in doing so. For those that wish to return, reconstruction support will be essential. As part of the Russian elites, proxies, and oligarchs, or REPO, task force, Canada has committed, along with 7 other governments, to take all available legal steps to find, restrain, freeze, seize, and where appropriate, confiscate or forfeit the assets of those individuals and entities that have been sanctioned in connection with Russia's aggressions against Ukraine. Legislation is currently before the Canadian Parliament, which will give the government authority to seize the assets of Russians implicated in the war against Ukraine and use those funds to finance reconstruction efforts. In testimony before our Parliament, government officials stated that $85 million in assets have already been frozen through sanctions against Russia, though independent experts have speculated that the true value of assets potentially subject to confiscation could be in the hundreds of millions or even billions. Such efforts will not rebuild Ukraine by themselves, but repurposing the wealth of those who support Ukraine's destruction sends a powerful message about our collective resolve to hold those responsible to account. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good to hear from Americas. Now we return to Mexico. Ms. Abro, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes. Antes que nada, quisiéramos reconocer el esfuerzo que se ha hecho en este informe. Y sin duda alguna, el tema de la guerra sigue siendo una doble tragedia para aquellos como los niños, como las mujeres y como los desprotegidos. Primero que nada por el trauma que se vive de ser desplazado del lugar de origen, de vivir toda la situación que significa esta, y una doble victimización, como diríamos, en el tema de los menores que tienen que salir, dejar su origen, dejar a su familia y ir a un país donde son acogidos. México no ha sido ajeno a esto, siempre hemos sido un país solidario. Lo recordarán cuando el tema de los niños que llegaron a México de España, y siempre ha sido un país solidario en este sentido. Hoy no es la excepción, como lo han señalado mis compañeros diputados y senadores, sobre las acciones que nosotros en conjunto podemos hacer y seguiremos haciendo en beneficio de lo que se ha llevado a cabo por ese desplazamiento de las familias, de las mujeres, de los hombres, de los niños y de las personas con capacidad diferentes. Hoy en día tenemos que seguir trabajando en conjunto y sobre todo ser fehaciente en el tema de que esto es un tema que afecta a todas las vertientes. Nosotros nos encontramos en otro continente, pero esto afecta en el tema económico. Para nadie es ajeno lo que significa, además, para la economía de Europa, pero para la economía mundial, en el desplazamiento de los precios del petróleo, del gas, que hoy en día se ha vertido también como una moneda de cambio y una moneda de chantaje para los países. Hay una advertencia velada en este sentido, lo cual también afecta directamente a la economía de cada familia de este continente y de todos a nivel mundial. Sin duda alguna, el efecto de la guerra es desgarradora para quien la vive de frente, pero no deja de ser un significado de que todos tenemos que ser solidarios, como lo estamos siendo, de nosotros a ser observadores e invitados al Parlamento Europeo, ser también fehacientes del hecho que estamos realizando, pero sobre todo no hacer oídos sordos a la súplica que hacemos todos los países que estamos viviendo esta situación. Nosotros también vivimos un tema muy importante, que es el tema del desplazamiento de Centroamérica, por el tema de la violencia, por el tema de las pandillas, por el tema del narcotráfico, y es otra guerra silenciosa que también estamos luchando. Pero eso nos hace todavía ser más sensibles y más solidarios al sentir que tenemos con Europa y sobre todo con Ucrania, con lo que están viviendo las familias. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Now I return to Canada. Miss Anna Roberts. I hope she will give some information about more and cheaper energy for Europe.
Mr. President, fellow parliamentarians, esteemed colleagues, I would like to first thank the committee and its rapporteurs for bringing these important issues before the Assembly today. While I am sure we could easily fill this time discussing any one of these topics, debating the women, peace and security agenda, along with humanitarian issues related to migration, makes a lot of sense. Because the women, peace and security agenda at its core is about preventing the humanitarian consequences of conflict. It is a recognition that inclusive societies and political systems in which women participate meaningful in decision-making are the best means of preventing conflict. Canada was an early supporter of women, peace and security agenda at the UN and continues to support a number of initiatives relating to the agenda. For example, Canada launched the ELSI Initiative for Women in Peace operation to increase the participation of uniformed women in UN peace missions. This initiative seeks to have the UN practice what it preaches and to do a better job of including women in operational roles in the field. While we must continue to improve conflict prevention efforts, including through the Women, Peace and Security agenda, sadly, we are forced to face the results of conflict today. UNICEF estimates that there are over 13 million child refugees and asylum seekers around the world in 2020. Nearly 1/3 of all children living outside of their country of birth is a refugee. Where these children are forced to cross borders unaccompanied or separated from their families during often dangerous journeys, they become particularly vulnerable and in need of specialized support. Receiving country governments need to ensure that children's rights are protected while partnering with civil society groups to provide the support they need, including access to education and mental health services. Wherever possible, children should be placed in communities, environments that promote integration and a return to normalcy. Civil society with government support are often better places to provide these kind of environments than governments alone. For example, in Toronto, a charity called Matthew House has been providing housing and other types of support to refugees and asylum seekers, including unaccompanied children, for more than 30 years. Support includes what they call house parents, volunteers who stay in the homes housing unaccompanied children to help steer them in wise directions. These children need help, but we should not look at support as necessary charity, but wise long-term investments. Properly support refugee children are more than capable of integrating into receiving countries and becoming valuable members of the community that welcome them. We in Canada welcome refugee children for decades and are all the stronger for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Now I move to our President Tini Cox.
I want to say thank you to the representative of Canada, and that concludes the list of speakers. A point of order, Damien? Take care that it's a point of order, because I'm strict.
Monsieur le Président, je demande à faire une brève déclaration personnelle. Mon pays, la Suisse, a été attaqué par Monsieur Goncharenko tout à l'heure et je souhaite répondre brièvement au nom de la délégation suisse que je préside. Je serai très bref. Monsieur le Président, M. Goncharenko a attaqué plusieurs pays en parlant d'armes qu'il aurait découvertes dans un tank en Ukraine. Il a notamment critiqué la Suisse en disant qu'il aurait découvert, on ne sait pas quel type d'éléments dans ce char venant de Suisse. Je suis président de la délégation suisse. Je précise ici que la loi suisse sur les embargos est appliquée depuis 2014 et prévoit une interdiction d'exportation d'armes dans des pays en guerre, à savoir l'Ukraine et la Russie. Par conséquent, si M. Goncharenko a découvert de tels éléments, soit ils datent d'avant 2014, et là nous étions dans un autre monde, soit ils datent d'après, et ce serait une exportation illégale, auquel cas je le prie de nous transmettre des faits et des éléments saillants pour que nous puissions mener une enquête, ou alors de ne pas faire de telles accusations dans cette Assemblée. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Merci beaucoup, Damien, pour ton explication. And that now concludes the list of speakers, and I call now Mr. Frides, the rapporteur, to reply, and you have 5 minutes.
Amen.
Mr. Van Pareren.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's also a point of order. I don't appreciate that you come with comments when Mr. Kochichenko is not in the room.
Sorry, sorry, Mr. Van Pareren, this is not a point of order. There is the right, if a delegation thinks that it has not been treated in a correct way, then the rules allow to make a short declaration, and that Mr. Goncharenko is not in the room. That is the decision of Mr. Goncharenko. The debate is still ongoing. So sorry that this is not a point of order. Mr. Frides, you have the floor.
Voilà, merci Monsieur le Président. Un grand merci à tous les intervenants dans ce grand débat. Et je vais me permettre de faire quelques commentaires et ensuite une petite note personnelle à la fin. Monsieur Ziak a posé une question pour savoir si on avait eu des contacts avec des organisations internationales. Donc il faut savoir qu'ici au Conseil de l'Europe, il y a des relations très très proches avec le HCR, notamment M. Wissner, qui est le représentant du HCR auprès de notre Assemblée, et que sur place, nous avons vu des gens du HCR, et on a surtout eu beaucoup de contacts avec l'OIM, l'Organisation internationale des migrations, qui nous a vraiment coachés, si on peut dire, en Slovaquie. Il y a aussi eu des contacts au niveau, semble-t-il, avec l'OSCE, mais c'était en fait administratif. Des remarques ont été faites qui sont aussi très évidentes, notamment la remarque de M. Gomez Reino d'Espagne, qui disait clairement, et ça c'est évident, il ne faut pas oublier les autres migrants. Et c'est vrai que, vraiment, je suis sincèrement heureux que notre continent ait eu à l'égard du peuple ukrainien l'attitude noble, essentielle, dont tous nos pays ont fait preuve. Mais c'est vrai que, étant dans la commission d'immigration depuis des années, je dois quand même constater qu'il y a un peu deux poids, deux mesures. Et c'est vrai qu'il y a aussi eu la guerre en Syrie ou ailleurs, et on n'a pas eu les mêmes attitudes. Monsieur Sanchez Garcia, aussi d'Espagne, je crois, disait qu'on mélangeait un peu tout, qu'il y avait des causes multiples au conflit. Ce qui est certain, c'est que dans les conflits, les victimes sont les mêmes. Ce sont des êtres humains, des hommes, des femmes, des enfants, des personnes qui attendent et qui espèrent protection de l'ensemble de nos pays. Madame Steenen a parlé d'une chose qui est très importante, c'est justement cette importance du rôle des collectivités locales. Et c'est là tout le sens un peu de la proposition qu'on fait avec le Congrès des pouvoirs locaux, de pouvoir imaginer une banque des jumelages dans notre pays, une bourse au jumelage dans l'ensemble de l'Europe, pour permettre aux collectivités locales en Ukraine d'avoir des contacts avec des collectivités locales dans tous nos pays. Et j'en ai parlé un des responsables des villes suisses, qui est un de nos collègues parlementaires suisses ici, et qui trouvait effectivement l'idée excellente. Il faut créer des contacts parce que dans la proximité, des choses sont possibles. Madame Christoffersen de Norvège, je crois, a dit une chose importante, c'est que nous, parlementaires, nous avons un rôle essentiel à jouer auprès de nos parlements pour relayer ces propositions, pour faire en sorte que tous nos pays se mobilisent. Et je termine par une petite remarque personnelle. Ma plus grande émotion en Ukraine, en fait, elle s'est passée en Ukraine, bien entendu, mais là, c'était à Kozice, c'était en Slovaquie. Nous avons eu l'occasion de visiter un camp où on prenait en charge des migrants. Et nous sommes allés, en fait, voir une psychologue qui était sur place. Et là, étant médecin, je lui ai demandé si elle avait des dessins d'enfants. Et je sais un peu interpréter les dessins d'enfants, et j'ai vu, je pense, le pire dessin de ma vie. C'est un enfant de 5-6 ans qui avait dessiné, en fait, un ciel noir, et puis il y avait un arbre. Et l'arbre, il était brun foncé, et il n'y avait aucune feuille. Et ça, je vous promets que c'est l'expression d'une grande souffrance. Fort heureusement, à côté, il y avait des dessins d'enfants comme on les voit, avec des fleurs, avec des animaux, avec un grand soleil, même plusieurs soleils. Et ce qui est toujours important, c'est comment les parents ressentent les choses et comment ils les transmettent aux enfants. Mais ça, c'est des émotions fortes qui montrent à quel point cette guerre va créer des traumatismes, il y aura des suites, et des besoins énormes sont nécessaires pour aider ces populations, pour aider ces enfants, pour faire en sorte que l'insupportable soit un peu moins insupportable. Merci pour votre attention.
Merci à vous, monsieur le rapporteur. Now I call Madame Mezensova, the rapporteur, to reply, and you too have 5 minutes.
I've made a lot of notes. Let me start from the very end. Switzerland has helped recently my home city with 207 tons of food. It was a private company, Zurich Insurance, but I just want to make sure that we appreciate highly the humanitarian aid. There is not every country who can deliver military support. We do know that. So following the comments, dear colleagues, you were very precise, and that makes me feel so warm-hearted because you have read the report and you went through the very core of it. I'm very thankful for you to underline in that among the something something that the report is suggesting. There is a kinship care, foster care, supervised independent living arrangements, small group cares, last support, and suitable residential care. But of course, we understand nothing will replace a family for a child. So the foster care in the framework of a family is the most appropriate one. My notes are saying that many of you were focusing on appropriate strategies of the child treatment, and of course the aging issue here is very important, because the assessments which are being done by international organizations, and this is a question from my colleague fellow from Slovakia, are answering the question what the international organizations are doing. So we definitely need to strengthen them with the civil society and your representatives, because the margin of the aging can be up to 5 years. So identifying whether this child of 16 or 21 is already a big gap. I would like also to thank for Mr. Lenné, who mentioned European Development Bank, and definitely the resources and the financing is at the core of it, because we are using the taxpayers' monies of the honorable member states, and they have to be used very efficiently. We of course follow the further developments with the so-called BIC approach, so the best interest of the child. Of course, this instrument existed before, and we want to elaborate a little bit more on that. Thank you for bringing again the Mr. Kalani from Ireland, the story of the girl from Kharkiv. Indeed, the children, as we sit right now, and the adults are currently under the rockets and attacks also elsewhere around Ukraine. The very important comments were coming from our colleagues from Mexico and Canada as well, underlining and emphasizing the role of also non-government sector. The governments are doing a great job, but the non-government sector also has a pivotal role here. Of course, I should also mention the Diaspora Association role, because many of those who are temporarily relocated trying to help those children on the ground, as I said in our side event, for instance, teachers or psychologists from such countries as Ukraine. Not to forget the wider geography which I was talking about: Syria, Afghanistan, even Chechnya, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Those are countries which have recently, I mean the modern recent history of our subcontinent, were suffering from major waves of children, migrant, unaccompanied children, and refugee children. And, colleagues, guess what? The cause of it was one former member state of this institution, the Russian Federation, who deliberately used our common interest to mislead you. And as of today, we have to deal with such different cases as child protection and education for all. Colleagues, even though Mr. Gavan has mentioned that humanitarian donations are decreasing, I am sure, and we see it in very concrete examples, that your member states are doing everything possible so that the child care and education is continuing, but also with a very specific humanitarian action. I would like also to thank the rapporteur, Mr. Fridas, for actually coming to those small towns and cities which are beyond their capacities in Ukraine, are trying to deliver everything they can. And a big, colleagues, a big thank to all of you that you are staying as of 7 p.m. today discussing Ukraine and beyond, because children is not our future. Children is our today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Rapporteur. And now I call Madam Kravchuk, the rapporteur, to reply, and you two have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I'll be much briefer than that because I understand it's been long debates. Thank you for contribution to these debates. It's very important for all that you said, and moreover, it's more even important what you did for Ukraine and other countries that experience such tragedies as war of aggression. And about the topic that I was covering in my resolution, in my report, I would like to say that having women at the table of negotiations means not just because women have to be there or just to put a checkbox. Women need to have a high role in political life, and then they'll be at all the tables, at business, economy, reconstruction, everything. So that is the key, and that is core to that. And I really thank for those men who spoke on this topic because, it's very often when there is a topic about, gender equality, only women in the room and only women contributing. So I really thank for those men who think that this topic is important and have to be addressed. And to conclude with, I would like to address the comment of our Finnish colleague that he's yes about the amendment. You mentioned that you are against militarization at all and army. Well, if we didn't have an army, we would not have only 20% of our territory occupied. We would have 100% of territory occupied, and we will not be staying there. So we thank our armed forces that defend our country, both women and men. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kravchuk. We are not going to have now a continuation of the debate in the first row. I now ask the chairperson of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons whether he wishes to speak. That is the case. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, we are about to vote for extremely important and timely reports. First of all, I would like to thank the rapporteurs for their rapid reaction, for their substantive work, and for having proposed realistic and to-the-point recommendations. Maria Mezentseva, you already said it. When you were appointed for this report, you probably never thought that your own country would be faced with the most terrible aggression from the Russian Federation. Thank you so much for having immediately reorientated your work so that your report is relevant to these new tragic circumstances. Pierre-Alain Frides, you also immediately reacted to the war in Ukraine by initiating a motion for resolution which has led to the draft resolution this Assembly is invited to vote right now. You traveled to Poland, Slovakia, Ukraine, and Romania, and I very much value your first-hand feed and recommendations. Dear President, I also thank the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, and its rapporteur, Mrs. Sibel Arslan, for the constructive opinion and amendments. Both committees will surely find useful synergies for the follow-up to this report and its resolution. Dear colleagues, you might find that I took too long to congratulate our rapporteurs, but these reports are exactly what this Assembly should be doing, providing concrete guidance to national parliaments and member states on difficult questions, really difficult questions. Unfortunately, we do not know when the war will end, but we do know that collectively, within our respective remits, we can help Ukraine and Ukrainians, vulnerable persons, including unaccompanied children and separated migrants, and refugee children have their rights respected. For this reason, I encourage all of you, dear colleagues, to wholeheartedly support the draft resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Soubolos, for your reaction. Does the Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination wishes to speak? that is the case. So, Mr. Benchico, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, we have just participated in very intense and very dense debate on no less than 3 reports, on which was prepared in our Committee on Quality and Non-Discrimination. I'll start by congratulating all 3 rapporteurs for having worked quickly and efficiently to respond to the urgent concern of the moment. It's another demonstration of the great capacity to react of our Assembly and of the Council of Europe itself. It's flexible to respond to emergencies despite being the grandmother of the international organizations. As Maria told us, she changed the focus of her report in a mid-preparation. And Mrs. Kravchuk was finishing her fact-finding visit to The Hague of her report on the day before the Russian attack. And Pierre Alain prioritized his report of all other obligations and visited the country. Thank you, all 3 of you, for your contribution. In our committee, we follow the work of Mrs. Kravchuk on her report on justice and security for women and peace reconciliation. She showed us, by her research and also by her personal example, that it's vital for women to be treated as equal in all parts of society and all levels. And only that condition can there be justice, equal access to the right, and prevention of violence, which is just another expression of the domination of who have kept power against who have not been empowered. Mrs. Kruchek's report shows that in peacetime, as in war, women need to be involved in decision-making, around the tables and peace talks, and given the confidence which leads to power sharing. I know that her resolution will be adopted today. What is needed from all of us is that we go back to our parliaments and put these recommendations into practice. We need to use this text as a checklist for achieving equality, justice, and proper protection for women all over in Europe and in all our interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fouad. The debate now is closed. I am glad that we could include all those on the speakers list in the debate, and I'm proud of you that we were able to do so because you were disciplined in the participation in the debate. The Committee of Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons has presented a draft resolution, which you find in document 15547, to which 13 amendments and 1 sub-amendment have been tabled. Amendments to the resolution will be taken in the order in which they appear in the compendium. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons wishes to propose to the Assembly that, apart from Amendment 10 and its sub-amendment, which must be dealt with individually, all other amendments to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Roussoupoulos?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Does anybody object? As that is not the case, there is no objection. I declare that apart from Amendment 10 and its sub-amendment, which must be dealt with individually, all other amendments to the draft resolution have been agreed. And that means that I can go to page 18. That helps a lot. We now come to Amendment 10 with sub-amendment. First, I call Madam Mezensova to support amendment number 10. You have 30 seconds, Maria.
It's very simple. We just want to emphasize that the national authorities should facilitate the resolution of the housing problems, which has recently arrived in different member states, including the programs which are already rolling, and we emphasize the programs for the partially subsidies for the rental costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Julian Boulay to support the sub-amendment. You have 30 seconds, Julian.
I will, of course, support this amendment with all the arguments that have been discussed till now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What is the opinion of the mover of the amendment? I assume that you said yes. Thank you very much. In favor. What is the opinion of the committee on the sub-amendment, Mr. Rousopoulos?
The same with Maria.
Then I now shall put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open.
We have to wait because there's a couple of people online apparently.
The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The sub-amendment is adopted. I now we now have to consider the main amendment, and does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? That is not the case, so I now shall put amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment as amended is adopted. We now will proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15547 as amended. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Can we have the results to be displayed? The resolution is adopted unanimously. Congratulations. The Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons has presented a draft resolution in document 15548, to which 7 amendments have been tabled. Amendments to the resolution will be taken in the order in which they appear in the compendium, and speeches are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons wishes to propose to the Assembly that the amendments 3, 4, 6, 7 to the draft resolution, which were adopted unanimously by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Rousopoulos?
I fully agree, Mr. President.
Does anybody object? As there is no objection, I declare that amendments 3, 4, 6 and 7 to the draft resolution have been agreed. I now call Madam Luz Martinez Seo to support Amendment 2. You have 30 seconds, Madam.
President, the amendment that I'm planning to introduce is based on the right of education, access to education to migrant children. It is recognized in international conventions, treaties and documents. Therefore, I think that member states cannot ignore it, and therefore I think it's very important to introduce it, not only because of international law, but also because it is an essential right which will help these children to integrate much better and have access and the right to education, which is a basic right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? I do not see any. What is the opinion of the committee?
No, Mr. President, the committee didn't take any position.
There is no position of the committee. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. May I have the results being displayed? The amendment is adopted. I now call Madam Sibylle Arslan to support amendment number 5 on behalf of the Committee of Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. Sibylle?
Bei diesem Antrag geht es darum, dass wir hier eine Streichung vorschlagen. Dieser Antrag wurde auch von unserer Kommission aus gut geheißen. Und zwar geht es darum, dass wir im Rahmen des Europarates bereits mehrere Plattformen haben, wo dieser Austausch, die Zusammenarbeit in Migrationsfragen genutzt werden kann. Im Sinne der Ressourcenschonung oder Ressourcenfokussierung habe ich vorgeschlagen, dass wir diesen Paragraph streichen, aber trotzdem auch weiterführen. Und deshalb wäre es eine Konzentrierung, damit wir die richtigen Instrumente effektiver gestalten können. Ich bitte Sie, diesem Antrag zu folgen. Besten Dank.
Danke sehr, Frau Arslan. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Madam Zensova.
Yes, colleagues, in multiple interventions, you have emphasized a support to European platform for exchange of knowledge. So the know-how practices are being born every day by the practices. And that's why we would like to suggest this platform for the extension of the existing mechanisms. And in our committee, we have supported the current text without deleting paragraph 7. Please support.
Thank you very much, Madam Zensova. What is the opinion of the committee?
Mr. President, our committee is against this amendment with a majority.
The committee is against the amendment with a majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment is rejected. I now call Madam Sibylle Arslan to support amendment number... I now call Madam Serap Yassar to support amendment number 1. Madam Yassar, you have 30 seconds.
Immédiatement agir pour accueillir et protéger les enfants migrants et réfugiés. Ce bon exemple doit être mentionné afin d'inciter d'autres États membres à prendre des mesures de protection similaires pour les enfants migrants non accompagnés et séparés. Chez nous, chez mon pays, il y a un proverbe qui dit « l'ingéniosité exige des compliments ». Cela signifie que les bonnes pratiques conduiront à d'autres bonnes pratiques à l'avenir. Merci.
Merci à vous, Madame. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Fridas.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais effectivement saluer l'effort qui a été fait par la Turquie, mais là, en l'occurrence, je suis en train de penser à l'ensemble des gens, l'ensemble des anonymes qui ont également œuvré, qui œuvrent régulièrement, et je trouve que c'est peut-être pas une bonne idée de personnifier avec un cas précis cet effort qui en fait revient à l'ensemble des pays, à l'ensemble des collectivités, et je vous propose donc de renoncer à cette proposition.
Merci, Monsieur Fridas. What's the opinion of the committee?
Mr. President, our committee is against this amendment.
Committee is against. I now shall put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment is rejected. We now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15548 as amended. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The resolution is adopted unanimously. Congratulations. The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution you find in document 15525, to which 5 amendments have been tabled. Amendments to the resolution will be taken in the order in which they appear in the compendium, and I remind that speeches are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Equality, the vice chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination wishes to propose to the Assembly that the amendments 1, 3, 4 and 5 to the draft resolution, which were adopted unanimously in the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Benchika? All 5 amendments have been adopted unanimously.
Yes.
Does anybody object? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. All 4 have been adopted unanimously. Does anybody object? I do not see so I declare that the amendments 1, 3, 4 and 5, which makes 4 in total, to the draft resolution have been agreed. I have received an oral amendment from Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk, which reads as follows. In paragraph 7, replace the words "The Assembly calls on national parliaments to" with the following words. The Assembly calls on Council of Europe member states and national parliaments to. If this amendment is agreed, Amendment 2 falls. The President, as you know, may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy or conciliation, and if there's not opposition from 10 or more members, to be debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7a. Is there any opposition to the amendment to be debated? I do not see a lot of people raise. No, nobody stands. So that is not the case, and therefore I call Madam Kravchuk to support oral amendment. The oral amendment, you have the 30 seconds.
Basically, dear colleagues, it's the compromise between me and Rapporteur for Opinion to not be repetitive, but to keep the sense that Mr. Ebert wanted to carry. So please support this oral amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Kravchuk. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? That is not the case. The committee is obviously in favor. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. May I ask the results to be displayed? The oral amendment is adopted unanimously. We will and therefore Amendment 2 falls. We now will proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15525 as amended. The vote is open. The vote is closed. May I ask the results to be displayed? The resolution is adopted unanimously. Congratulations. Dear colleagues, thanks a lot for this fine debate. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock with the agenda which was approved on Monday morning. The sitting is adjourned.